Let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the R3 What Women Want webinar. We are so excited that you're joining us today. We have an all-star crew here to share some fantastic information with you. My name is Taniya Bethke, and I'm your host today. I'm the Director of Operations with the Council to Advance Hunting and the Shooting Sports. In both my personal and professional lives, have an opportunity to advocate for safe and inclusive outdoor spaces for all people. And with that makes me incredibly excited to be able to join you all and host this conversation today. So with that, in case you were curious of where you ended up, and in case the title of this was mystifying to anyone in the audience, I just wanted to remind us that we're here to talk about some incredible research that has pointed to what practices in R3 programming really truly help to increase confidence and competence in women that are going through Learn to Hunt programming. So thank you for joining us in that conversation, and let me share some housekeeping items with you here shortly. We have quite a few people that are registered for this event today. Last I checked, we had about 661 registrants, which meant, yes, we disabled the chat. That is to help protect and host a distraction-free environment for our panelists and our hosts. But we do encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A, and these are questions that we expect to be respectful, germane to the content that is being shared, and we may not have an opportunity to get to every single one of your questions. We have quite a few people to manage here, but we will be keeping documentation and track of those questions that we don't get to, and if there's an opportunity to respond to those in another format, we certainly will. Along those lines, if you, again, do have questions for the panelists, we'll have two separate Q&A sessions, one specifically on the research that has been held, and an additional follow-up on the application of that research, as well as for our panelists that will be sharing on their practices in their field. Along those lines, all of this would not have happened without the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Multi-State Grant Program. So the research and this webinar are brought to you by that. So thank you very much for that opportunity. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to the very first person I have the joy of introducing. We have Marissa Jensen with us. She's the Outreach and Education Program Manager for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. And she is a phenomenal facilitator within this project, along with Dr. Christine Thomas. She's a primary investigator and has been instrumental in the preparation for this morning's webinar. So with that, Marissa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Taniya. And thank you to everyone for being here today, for joining us. We're incredibly excited and blown away by the response that we've seen to this event. Really just exceeded our expectations. And that alone shows us the importance of this collective effort to build retention rates for women in R3. I want to start by recognizing, everyone here for the work that you've done and that has been done over the course of the last 30 years for women in hunting and shooting sports. Thank you to all the trailblazing women and men who have gotten us here to where we are today. Additionally, if you're here, it's because you're a part of these collective efforts to not only provide opportunities to introduce women to archery, shooting sports, and hunting, but because you recognize the importance of building confidence and competence for these participants to continue as self-identified hunters and sport shooters. We recognize the number of women in hunting and shooting sports is increasing. However, we also know that churn rate is high. And so that's one of the main reasons why we're here today. How can we work together to increase retention for women in R3? Responsive management will be diving into this very problem here shortly by sharing the results of a comprehensive study that looked at what's standing in the way of women becoming more active in hunting, archery, and shooting sports. In fact, this partner project worked with over 10,000 women to gather details into what they liked, what they didn't like, and what they wanted more of from their R3 experience. So we invite each one of you as individuals, organizations, and agencies, and partners to become part of the future of this project and our R3 efforts for women hunters, archers, and sport shooters, as we look to evaluate the success of one-and-done events and what we might do to build confidence and competence in women hunters and sport shooters by providing multiple touch points. We hope you get as much out of today as I know we will, and we look forward to continuing to work together moving forward. I'll pass it back to you now, Taniya.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that overview, Marissa, and we're excited to have this conversation with you. Also, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Judy Camuso, an avid outdoors woman and total powerhouse in the field of outdoor recreation and conservation. Thank you so much for joining us today and to help us set the stage and welcome all of the viewers for this conversation. So with that, please, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Taniya. And thank you all for being here today and for the opportunity to join. I'm pretty proud to be here. I want to extend my apologies to anyone who signed up thinking I was going to give relationship advice. Although some of these ideas probably work for both, I am going to focus on women and hunting. This subject is near and dear to my heart as both an adult onset hunter and the first female commissioner at Maine Fish and Wildlife. I am committed to helping more women engage with wildlife, both through hunting, shooting, and professionally. When I first became commissioner, I worked in an agency that was in a field that was and still is predominantly men. Like most states I've been commissioner since about 2019. And at that time, our license sales were slowly declining like most other states. And women made up less than 13% of our licensed hunters. So as commissioner, it made perfect sense to me that as I'm trying to grow hunters and want to maintain our license sales, right, the financial fees that come with that, but also the wildlife management aspects of hunting, women were the primary sort of segment of the population I had targeted as trying to attract. But, getting into hunting isn't that easy. And before I was commissioner, I was director of wildlife here at the agency and also the first woman to hold that position. And at almost every single meeting I had or that I was in, both internally and with external stakeholders, I talked about my desire to learn to hunt. And nobody ever invited me. I worked with about 300 people who hunted, and I had a hard time getting into the field. So I can imagine how difficult it is for people who don't have access to that many people who hunt regularly. So when I first became commissioner, I met with a group of women of the Maine outdoors, and asked, what are the biggest barriers for women, getting more women to participate? And they gave me a few pretty clear answers. The first was pretty simple: marketing, images. There's no photography. There's just no pictures of women doing these activities. None of the magazines, the catalogs, they don't portray women. And if you don't see people that look like you, it's hard to picture yourself doing that activity. The second was gear, and that there is not a significant lack of gear designed for women. And after 10 years of working as a field biologist for the department, where I had to wear men's pants, I'm loath to wear clothing that's designed for men. And I don't need to state the obvious, but we have different parts. And I shouldn't have to wear clothes that are designed for a different gender. The third obstacle is a little bit of a bigger issue and a harder nut to tackle, and that I think is culture. And I think that is somewhat pervasive in the hunting and in the wildlife profession. The hunting community is not always welcoming to new people, and especially not to women. Women are often treated like children, assumed that we're beginners or like we're outsiders, like we aren't serious or capable or committed. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a hunting or fishing store and been asked, is this for your dad or your husband? Or how many times when I was director of wildlife, people would explain biological concepts to me. How many times I've been dismissed for hunting small game and not being a big trophy hunter. So those things are all kind of demoralizing, and I think are barriers for women. Years ago, and this is just sort of a funny story, my niece had her bachelorette party. Part of her bachelorette party was here at a shooting range in Hartford, Maine, a little town in Maine. 14 of her girlfriends, all in their sort of mid to late 20s. Some of them kind of scantily clad, but they showed up to the range for a couple hours of clay shooting. And a couple of the girls were actually competitive shooters, so were really good shots. And most of the women were pretty good at hitting the clays, and we were having a blast. But at one point I turned around, and there was an entire wall of men, a whole, like probably 30 men standing there staring at us, mouth dropped, like agape, as if they were staring at, a herd of unicorns, like they had never seen anything like this in their lives. I do think that culture is changing. I think women are becoming more regular parts of these worlds, and culture is not changing as fast as I would like, but I do think there's a lot of hope there. When I think of what women want, I think we can lump them into some big categories. Mostly, I think women want to be included and they want to be respected. They want to feel safe, competent, and confident. And this is a challenge for women and anybody really who are new to shooting. So getting comfortable with the firearm isn't easy. Operating a gun, it's not like picking up a pair of binoculars or a fishing rod. You can't get comfortable in 10 or 15 minutes. It took me until I actually purchased my own shotgun and went upland bird hunting for several days in a row, and you're loading and unloading your gun over and over all day long. I think feeling safe and confident in the woods, guiding a deer or any kind of wild game is really empowering. And I think feeling safe in the woods, alone in remote areas with other people, mostly men who are also in those remote areas with guns, can be intimidating. And I think that is a barrier we have to help people get over. One thing I think we don't want to talk about is the way we look. And we don't want to be criticized for looking a certain way, particularly feminine. You can hunt, shoot, gut wild game, and still have manicured nails if that's what you want. I'm amazed in almost every interview I give about women and hunting, I'm asked about pink camo or if I wear makeup when I'm hunting. And my answer is all the same, like whatever, I wear whatever I want. Like I wear what's comfortable and functional. I don't care what anybody else wears when they're in the woods, and women should feel free to wear whatever makes them feel good. I'll be honest, I usually wear a little bling. After years of wearing what I call the man suit, my man's uniform that I had to wear, I like to look feminine. And that's fine. People should wear whatever they want. I think women want to be part of a community. There's a strong social aspect to hunting, and I think women are really attracted to that. We want and need support in that community, both from our family, our friends, and our hunting groups. Sometimes we need our partners to pick up the kids in the morning or make dinner so we can hunt the last few hours of the day or the early morning. And we want to be able to share our stories and experiences with other people who can relate and understand. Getting good at hunting isn't something you can do overnight. It takes time and practice and patience. And I think many women would like to have effective mentors who they can share their learning experiences with, whether they're men or women. I've seen so many positive relationships between genders, people we can call and rely on while we're getting more confident. All of my hunting mentors have been men. And the person who finally offered to take me out deer hunting was the former Sportsman Alliance of Maine director, George Smith. And the first day, my reaction when we went deer hunting in the afternoon, I came back and I was like, oh my God, you men have been keeping this a secret from women on purpose. This is not at all what I thought it was going to be. This is like the male version of meditation or yoga. It's the first time my brain has been quiet in a month. And I have been hunting ever since. And so, like my perception and my reality of the two activities were very different. That I learned so much from the male mentors that I've had. So I'm just going to touch base. I know I only have a couple minutes, but on a couple of the things that we've done in my agency that I think have made a difference. And I will share that the number of women buying licenses in Maine now has increased to almost 15%, so up from about 13% 4 years ago. Well, at first glance, it doesn't seem like a big change. That's a change in the percentage of the hunting population as a total, which has increased by about 9%. So the total number of women hunting went from about 21,000 to right about 25,000 now. So that's an increase of about 17%, which is pretty good. So the first thing I did when I became commissioner was mandate that if we require people to wear a uniform, any article of clothing that we require that's a staff person wear, if it doesn't come in a version for women, it doesn't come in women's sizings, then we don't buy it. So there's a requirement that we have reasonably equal uniforms for clothing that staff are required to wear. We quickly switched and started highlighting a whole much more diverse group of photographs. So we have all kinds of women on our website, all of our marketing materials now, and We have blogs featuring our female staff, podcasts, video casts. You can go on our website and learn all about, particularly about the female biologists that are on staff, some of the game wardens, and also some interviews with female hunters. About 2020, we switched over to a fully online hunter ed program, and so that was partly the pandemic. But we've been talking about that for years, and the pandemic just kind of caused us to pull the trigger, if you will. And excuse me, I have a little frog. But in that first year, normally our licensed hunter ed, we have about 3,500 people go through a hunter ed program in a given year. And in that first year alone, we put 7,000 people went through the fully online hunter ed version, and 30% of those participants were women, and 50% of those participants were between the ages of 18 and 35, which is our target demographic for growth. We offer women-only events at the range. We offer a whole host of like women's trappers classes. We have a whole host of next step programs. And so these programs are designed for new hunters. So if you've got your hunter safety, now what are you going to do? Do you want to hunt turkey? Okay, here's how you call a turkey. Here's how you set up a turkey blind. These are both in person and online, so people can watch them on our YouTube channel. Things like how to gut a deer, how to process a deer. We have cooking videos on how to cook wild game. So we've really sort of amped up that module where we can have folks learn on their own time, and what's comfortable, for them. And we've had a lot of feedback from women in particular that works much better for their schedule, both with kids or family and sporting activities, but also just honestly not having to go to a rod and gun club that's filled with men. It's a lot more comfortable to do these things, in your own environment where you feel comfortable and safe. We are working on trying to get more female instructors for a lot of our programs. We still do have more men than women. And we, of course, have a Becoming an Outdoor Woman program. And I know other people on the talk here are going to talk about that a little bit more in length, so I won't talk about that. When we are hiring, some of these are internal changes, but I think they affect the culture, which I do believe permeates out. So we switched over to all our hiring panels have to be 50% male, 50% female. And everybody that participates in a hiring panel in my agency has to go through an implicit bias training so that we can make sure that we aren't skewing who we hire based on our personal biases. So lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about community and some of the aspects of social media. And many women are people who learn to hunt. They learn to hunt or fish with a family member or partner. And if that relationship changes, they stop participating. I was recently talking to actually the Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Court, and she had been an avid hunter, but she and her husband got divorced. And so now she's really missing the opportunity. She doesn't go out as much without him. So I think social media is a really good opportunity to provide those sorts of communities. We have a group here in Maine, the Maine Women Hunters, and it is a social media group just for women. It's a place where people can ask questions, share experiences, reach out for help. Also, we do activities. So we actually go out into the field and we do a women's only rabbit hunt or duck hunt, all sorts of things. So ways for people to engage and talk to people where they feel safe and comfortable asking questions that they might not feel comfortable asking in another setting. And I do think that community that we have here has allowed for some of our retention rates for women to be stronger than they are in some other areas. And I know Mark's going to touch on that, so I won't get into that. But, I'm happy to share, as a woman who started out my career as a non-game biologist and a vegetarian, I now hunt deer, upland birds. I've got 3 German short-hair pointers, turkey, waterfowl. I go moose hunting when I get the chance, which isn't very often, but I go out as often as I can. I post most everything I do on our social media, on my Facebook or Instagram account, trying to help other women see that if I can do it, so can they. And I'll continue to do this and to help whatever I can do to help other women and new hunters get engaged in hunting, fishing, shooting, wildlife biology. I do believe these activities are so amazing. They're so restorative and healthy on so many levels. And I think if we all do that, we will inspire more people to be engaged in conservation and help protect the things that we all think are so important and are passionate about, hunting, fishing, outdoors. These are activities for everyone. It doesn't matter what you look like, and it should be open and inviting community for everyone. I like to think that as more people participate, it will help create a new positive culture, both in the outdoor community and beyond. So thank you all for inviting me here today, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists.
Thank you so much for what an incredible welcome that was. I'm just incredibly thankful to have you here and to share both your personal stories as well as your professional achievement. Next, we'll be bouncing over to the folks that are the core of the research end of this project. So Responsive Management has joined us, and I'll be introducing each of the members of their team. Please join me in welcoming Executive Director Damian Duda, Survey Center Manager Amanda Center, Business Manager Allison Lanier, Senior Research Associate Andrea Criscione, and their presentation on the research that is the base and the very core of the findings that are driving this change in behavior by practitioners to better serve women in R3 programming. So with that, thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Taniya. Can you see my screen? Did that work? That's always the most nerve-wracking. Good morning, everyone. My name is Damian Duda. I'm the Executive Director of Responsive Management. I was looking down, and we have almost 400 participants in this, and that's pretty amazing. When Christine and I sort of hatched this project 3 years ago, this is phase 2 of the phase 1 project. I don't think we ever would have thought or had more than about 30 people. And when Marissa joined us for phase 2, we thought, well, maybe we'll get 60, 70 people. We see some people out there who are interested. So having, over 600 people sign up, 400 people, 385 people join us, we really appreciate that and hope you get a lot out of it. So we're going to present the research, me and several people from Responsive Management. We've got about 45 minutes to do that. Just walk you through what's happening. After that, we are going to answer any questions you have for about 15 minutes, and then certainly Ken afterwards as well. But thank you so much. Thank you, Taniya. Thank you, Council to Advance the Hunting Shooting Sports, for agreeing to host this. You guys do an amazing job, and everybody really appreciates it. So sort of with those thank yous, all of these partner acknowledgements are important. It was actually the California Waterfowl Association that partnered with us on phase 1. Holly Heiser, who is no longer at California Waterfowl, but is still involved with numerous women hunting and shooting programs. Dr. Christine Thomas, National Wild Turkey Federation, and Mandy Harling, Arizona Game and Fish, and for phase 2, Pheasants Forever. And so, Marissa, thank you so much for being a part of this. Wow, and now that we're thanking everyone, we had a lot of help on phase 1. We worked with numerous agencies, about half of the agencies out there. They allowed us to use their licensed databases. They allowed us to talk to the people in their programs, the participants, and it wouldn't have happened without them. So can't go through all of those, but really appreciate all of those partners as well. So let's take a look now, and we're going to sort of give a big, broad overview of women and their participation in hunting, shooting, exclusive of hunting, and archery. And again, archery exclusive of bow hunting. So 3 sort of the big 3, if you will. So you've seen the headlines. Women are the fastest growing segment of the population. Some really neat and exciting things going on. 33% of first-time gun buyers in 21 were women, and just, huge explosion. And that is true to an extent, but I want to dive deeper into that. And the first thing that I want to say is that this isn't new. When we were looking at the data a few years ago, when we were developing the grants to get the money to do some of this research, I went back to some things that we did in this is actually written in 1995. We don't even have this electronically. And so it's fun to start at the beginning there. And so this is a study that we called Factors Related to Hunting and Fishing Participation, done in the early 90s, final report issued in 95. So that was 30 years ago. And I want you to take a look at one of the graphs that I pulled out here. because it puts things in perspective. And it was actually a major finding of the study itself. And there's some pretty cool things here. I mean, look at this. At the time, this is the National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation. It's a huge study, but part of it was a multivariate analysis on the data that we had available to us from 1980, 85, and 90. And so one of the things to draw your attention to at that time, I mean, think how things have changed. Almost 20% of American males were participating in hunting. But over that study period, from 80 to 90, we saw a decrease. In that same time period, yeah, it wasn't big numerically maybe, but we had a doubling, literally a doubling of women who hunted. And so what was really interesting about this study is that when we did it, we were able to isolate the reasons, the demographic, those broad demographic reasons why males were decreasing related to age and living in urban areas, and minus the urban areas, actually living in rural areas. But yet with women, when we ran all sorts of statistics, we couldn't identify it from a statistical standpoint why women were hunting at double the rates in only a 10-year period. And so we had to attribute that to more social issues as opposed to those big, broad demographic trends that usually we're able to connect things to. So that was really interesting. 1995. And so the first thing is that this isn't new. We've seen this over the years of sort of this steady increase in women participating in hunting, shooting, and archery. And so let me just sort of give you sort of an overview of what you're dealing with. And you're going to see different numbers out there. You know, this many percent of women hunt, and this shoot, and this many, and this many. And sometimes they're conflicting. And sometimes it can be frustrating. And so hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on this, because this is where it all starts, is understanding our market out there, in this case, women hunting, shooting, and archery. And so the first thing is how many women are hunting, in this case, in a 1-year period, or shooting in a 1-year period versus a 5-year period versus ever. Now, this isn't just research jargon, because there's some pretty important reasons that we need to know these things. We want to know the percent of the population under study, in terms of what percent of women are shooting, what percent of our population are women who are hunting. And then finally, I want to just sort of talk to you about what we call churn. And that is that people, you know, you might see in your databases, X number of women are buying a license this year and this year and this year. Let's say it's 200,000, 201,000, 199,000. And people really assume that those are the same people buying licenses every year. Well, they are not. In some states, if you look at a 5-year period and the people who are coming in and out and staying, if you look at one state, 64% of the women in that database in a 5-year period buying a license only showed up one time. Think about that. You've got a 5-year period, and those one-timers, 64%, over how 2/3 of these women bought a license one time in a 5-year period. On average, it's about 50%. 50% of women are only showing up once in a 5-year time frame in agency hunting license databases. And so then look at the bottom there, female license buyers in a 5-year period. 63% are one-timers. 25% are buying a license 2 and 3 years out of that time period, and only 10% of those women are buying a license 4 and 5 out of a 5-year period. Wow. Think about that. That's pretty interesting and amazing. So then let's take a look at other issues related to women, and in this case, hunting. From a median perspective on days hunting, males are hunting 20 days a year and women are hunting 10 days a year. And then finally, we have this gender gap. So I showed you that percent of the churn and the avids and stuff, but I want you to think about this too, because this is at the heart of recruitment and really at retention. So in some states, those avid hunters, those people who are buying a license 4 out of a 5-year period, are 2 to 1 in favor of men. So there's double the amount of men who are buying licenses on an avid basis, 4 and 5 years out of a 5-year period. One state, the gender gap was huge. 42% of males were buying a license 4 and 5 years, and only 16% of women were. Now in Maine, and when I was going through it, I saw and I smiled because I've worked with Maine and Judy for over 10 years now in a number of projects, non-controversial things like bear hunting and other things that she's been involved with. And I saw this and I was like, okay, look at Maine has closed that gender gap more than anyone else. And I thought, I know who we want for our keynote speaker for the webinar. So Judy, amazing job there. And she's explained to you those reasons. And really, it comes down to something that Judy talked about. You buy things that look like you. You buy things that look like you. That term actually came from a focus group that we were doing about 25 years ago. We were asked by the fishing community. This was sort of in preparation of the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundations on why women and why Blacks were not fishing at the rates that men were. You know, we know a lot now, but this was 25 years ago. We've been asked to do that by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And pictures can paint 1,000 words here. On the left, we have some very, very welcoming people who want women into their store. Come on in, ladies. We will tell you how to do things. Well, I don't know. And I go back to this woman. It was a Black woman in Richmond, Virginia, after this focus group. And we talked about Blacks and women in fishing. And she said, you know, Mark, we've talked about a lot of things, but it comes down to one thing. She said, you buy things that look like you. 25 years later, I still use that young lady's terms. It's so brilliant. You buy things that look like you. And Judy addressed that. She knew that intuitively. So look on the right there. Is that much more welcoming? Are those photos that look more like our up-and-coming women hunters or women who are in hunting or shooting or archery? Of course, you buy things that look like you. So let's take a look at the big numbers because I think they're really important. They set the foundation of what it is that we're trying to do. So there's some things that we can say. We can say that in general, there's been an increase in women's participation in hunting. And we think there's about 7 to 12 million active women hunters out there. Now, again, there's reasons for that because some studies show different things on a yearly basis or a 5-year basis. So you're going to see some of these sways. But that rate of churn is so important that it's going to show different numbers. I mean, how many women hunters are in the state of, Virginia, where I'm from? Well, 4 out of 5 years, we have 10 or 20%. But 5 out of 5 years, we have 100%. You're doubling, you're tripling the number of women who are really hunting. So there's some definitional things. We've seen rates increase. We've seen studies go from a possible decrease in terms of overall numbers in a 10-year period, past 15 years or so, to an 11% over the past decade. Again, they are measuring different things. Now, among hunters, and you take all that pool of hunters, it ranges from about 10% being women to 27%. A huge range in terms of what these studies are showing. But hopefully I can clarify some of this because some of those higher estimates tend to be derived from panel surveys. And you need to be careful of panel surveys. These are people who've signed up, who are being given money to do that, and they're not always exactly a reflection of what's out there. The other thing that we know is more women than men do panel surveys. So that 27%, yeah, probably a little bit high. The mid-range estimates, about 20%, 2 out of 10 hunters being women, come from those general population surveys. Lower estimates are about 13%. Judy said hers was, I think, 14%, again, of those licensed databases. And then the lowest number, interestingly, is the national survey. This is 2016, because we don't have the 2020 data yet. They're just collecting the data now, is about 10%, which I think is interesting. But again, if you hear different numbers, there's reasons why. So let's talk about women in sport shooting. And let me just sort of put some light on this because sometimes you hear these huge numbers out there. 50 million people are shooting. And you think, holy cow, 20% of the population. But let me put that in perspective when we talk about sport shooting. This is some of these people are hunters, of course, but there's a much larger number of people who are sport shooting. 42 to 45% of U.S. households have a firearm. We know that from response management research. We know that from Gallup research. We know that from Pew research. Every single legitimate study puts that at about 42 to 45% of all US households. About a third, 32 to 35% Americans own a firearm. There's some big numbers. So it shouldn't surprise you that there's probably about 16 to 15 million women sport shooters. Again, they're definitional and they're studies that show different things in terms of time frames. This was done in 2016, this was done in 22 or whatever. Now, the real reason that there's such a surge in women participating, about 25 to 28% of our shooting population are women. And that's been fairly steady. It hasn't gone up a lot. But what has gone up a lot is the sheer number of people in general shooting. And so there's been some huge numbers. So yes, while 25, 24, it sort of bounces around a little bit. This is the work that we do with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We've been following shooting now since about 2009. We followed that surge. But what you're looking at here is the percent of men versus women, males versus females, who are shooting. So you're thinking, well, why? Why are we seeing this huge numbers when that's like that? Well, it's simply because there's a lot more people shooting. So there's a lot more women shooting. And the question is if I said, I'll give you 25% of $1 million, or you can have 25% of $2 million, what are you going to take? You're going to take 25% of $2 million because it's more. And so while the ratio of men to women hasn't really changed hugely, is that a word? I'm not sure. Should have looked that up before my presentation. So while it's a huge number, it's fairly steady on a percent on a ratio basis, but overall it's increasing fairly dramatically. And so we talk about all of these new shooters, about 17, 18% in a 5-year period of people moving into shooting participation are new. And so it's really cool to look at who those people are. What is that 20% of new shooters who are coming in? Well, it doesn't look like what they used to be. They are more likely to be Black, Hispanic, Latino, younger, didn't hunt, and women. So some really interesting things going on in terms of what's happening sort of underneath the surface, if you will. Women in archery, we don't have near as much information. We've done a lot of work for the Archery Trade Association over the years, but just not as much as the hunting and shooting side. We know there's about 3 to 8 million women who are doing archery, and we know that somewhere between 30 and 40% of all of those people, this is not hunting, this is not shooting, these are people who are truly doing archery, are women. And then we do pretty much think, again, I look at so much data, I look at so many different studies, some say this and some say that, but that I feel pretty certain that the percentage of females within the target archery population is increasing. And so all of that data led us, Christine and I, a few years ago to be like, well, we need to figure out what in the world's going on and to try to understand this. And so in a minute, Amanda for my staff is going to talk about specifics, but we're really here for 2 reasons. To talk to you about one, the first study that we did that we just ended last year, and the project was how to retain female participants. We didn't talk about bringing women in. We didn't talk, there's certainly some retention here, but it was really retention issues. And then also how to improve the programs that are out there now to bring women in, the hunting programs, the shooting programs, and the archery programs. It was a big study. And again, Amanda's going to talk more, but it was over 10,000 women that we talked to in a very scientific interview type way. And then also we did a series of focus groups with these sportswomen. And so the next phase, the phase that we're in now, and again, Amanda's going to talk about this a little bit, but I want to sort of put it on the big picture, is that we know 10,000 women out there, and we know who they are. We know how to contact them. We know where they are on the outdoor recreation adoption model. And what we want to do is we want to work with those 10,000 women. We want to work with you all who are doing programs. And one of the primary reasons we're here is we want to recruit you as in terms of helping us get inventories of all the programs out there. And then we want to send those women through invitations, through personal calls, and all sorts of ways to the programs that are most likely to help them retain their participation in those 3 activities. That's pretty exciting. And again, as Taniya said, we are really appreciative to the Wildlife Restoration Program that we're able to do this. But the most important thing that you're going to hear all day long from my staff, and certainly probably from the other speakers, is that the most important issue is retention. That is our goal. And after all of the research that we did last year, it came down to really 5 things that you're going to hear a couple of times because it's so important. You know, if this was a 5-minute webinar, we could have said, we did all this research, we talked to all these people, we spent all this money finding these things out. And really, it comes down to 5 things: helping women feel more comfortable, helping women more prepared, helping women become more successful or competent, having them be more confident and more autonomous. The very stories that Judy talked about from her own experience fit right into these buckets. And if you're developing programs, if you're rejiggering your programs, I would love to have you look back at this and say, okay, we know from all this research, from all these great women, 10,000 women who told us what they need, to put them in these buckets in terms of our goals. How do we make these people coming more comfortable? How do we make them more prepared? How do we make them more successful? How do we make them more confident? In a little while, a staff member of mine, Andrea or Ali, I don't know who has this part of it, but is to make women more autonomous. We talked to so many women who their ties to hunting were through their male counterpart, their boyfriend, their husband or brother or something, and those people leave and they're left outside. They don't have that independence, and we want to make them more independent. So anyways, with that brief overview, I'm going to turn that over now to Research Associate Amanda, who has worked at Responsive Management for over a decade, and she's going to talk to you about specific methods. Because we have 4 people doing this, you're going to hear them say change the slide, because we figured it'd be less awkward to have one person doing it. So anyways, with that, let me turn that over to Amanda.
Good morning, everybody. As Mark said, I'm Amanda Center. I am a research associate and the survey center manager at Responsive Management. And I'm going to be discussing the methodology of the first phase of research. And in addition to all the information that I present here, which is going to be quite a lot, we do have full methodology in the report if you'd like to find out more information about this. Today, I'm just going to go over the key aspects of the methodology. So we can do the next slide. All right, so to begin, the purpose of this research was, there were a couple of different purposes. One of the purposes was to better understand participation in hunting and recreational shooting with firearms and archery equipment. We also wanted to dive into the success of some state and NGO-run R3 programs to understand how effective they were, as well as how they could be improved. And finally, the purpose of the entire project, both this phase and later phases, as we have mentioned already, is on how to retain female participants once they've started participating in some of these outdoor activities. This is a multi-year study, so the information we're reviewing today focuses on the first year of data collection. So I'm going to dive right into this. There were 4 surveys that we conducted. One was with female hunters, one with female sport shooters, one with female archery participants, and one with female R3 program participants. We also conducted focus groups with hunters, sport shooters, and archery participants. And in terms of the sample that was used months prior to starting this project, we reached out to every state and asked them to participate if they had hunting license databases with at least 5 years of license information, so we could get an idea of, avid versus, beginners. 19 states with representation in all 4 of the Afro regions agreed to participate. So next slide, Mark. So in this slide, we're getting into the specifics of the 4 surveys that were conducted. And of the 4 surveys, 2 were multimodal, meaning they were done on phone and online, and that was the hunters and the sport shooter surveys. And 2 were online, and that was the archers and R3 program participants. And just to explain our sample and multimodal approach so that everybody understands it, we started with the full database of hunters from each of the 19 participating states. And our statisticians pulled a random sample of female hunters that had emails only or phone and email, and another random sample of those who only had phone numbers listed for a point of contact. And we then sent emails to everyone who had been randomly selected for the online survey and began calling those who were randomly selected to participate in the phone survey. And we used a 5-call design and a 4 email design. And what that means is that we would try to reach each respondent at least 4 times by email, with an initial email being sent and then 3 reminder emails sent after a number of days and at different times of the day and on different days of the week. And with the call design, we did something very similar. We would try an initial call and then try up to 4 more times at different times of the day and on different days of the week. And this is a really important practice in ensuring you're giving everyone an equal opportunity to be reached and participate. But in addition to that, we also moved female hunters who had both a phone number and an email address, who were initially contacted by email but did not respond to the email, back over to our phone sample, where we tried them again via phone. And this is really important. It's a really important component of outreach and data collection, because after years of conducting this research and collecting this data, we have learned that there are distinct differences between those who respond by email and those who respond by phone, particularly when it comes to those who respond to the initial email request for participation. Those are often people who are very excited and very interested in participating. So that gives more range of different types of participants when we move the sample like that. So to go into the specifics of each survey, the female hunters, we collected 5,389 completed surveys, with at least 900 in each of the 4 Afro regions. For the female sport shooters, we collected 4,633 completed surveys, and they were collected nationwide. And the sport shooters were collected in 2 ways that I think is worth mentioning. First, we collected information about female sport shooters from each state's hunting database. And we did this by asking in the survey upfront about both hunting and sport shooting participation. So if someone only participated in sport shooting, they would be asked questions only about their sport shooting. If someone hunted and went sport shooting, they would be randomly assigned to answer survey questions about either their hunting or their sport shooting. That was the first portion. The second sample that we used was an online sample that targeted women sport shooters. And this portion of the data collection was done to supplement the license database, so that the female sport shooter data would not consist exclusively of those who had hunted and gone sport shooting, but would also represent some who had gone sport shooting and did not hunt. So that was an important element. We wanted to have good representation of both of those groups. And then the third survey, as I mentioned, was the female archery participants. And this was only non-hunting archery participants. And we collected 438 completed surveys nationwide on that. Finding general population archery participants can be a little tough. So that was a nationwide survey. And then females who participated in R3 programs was the final survey. And we collected 594 completed surveys from participants in 25 different R3 programs, which included Becoming an Outdoors Woman, Outdoor Skills, and Artemis, as well as 22 others. We also did get some information on non-participants, and non-participants occurred for a couple of different reasons. We may have found someone who purchased a license but was yet to go hunting, or someone might have purchased a license for them, but they hadn't used the license, among other reasons. And so those non-participants were asked a couple of questions. They were asked a few demographic questions of whether or not they had participated, and they were also asked what might encourage them to participate. And next slide, Mark. All right, so this slide may seem a little off topic, but I think it's really important in understanding how this methodology that I'm discussing can be an excellent predictor of future behavior. So 99% of the work that we do is all about conservation, but we also work with a number of universities around the country. And this study that is mentioned on this slide is a series of political polls that we conducted for Virginia Commonwealth University. And the first image on the right of the Virginia presidential results from 2020. And we were actually within 1.5 percentage points of predicting the Virginia presidential results. And those all went for Joe Biden. And the second image on the right is from a year later, just a year later. And after Virginia going Democrat in the presidential election, our polling showed that Youngkin, a Republican, was polling higher in Virginia, which may have seemed slightly strange to us, but it turns out it was right on the money, and we were within 2 percentage points of accurately predicting that election. And so, like I said, the important takeaway here is that when you use a really strong, solid methodology, such as those used with the VCU study and those used with the women's study we're discussing here today, we can accurately predict future behavior. And so I think that's a really important thing to understand. Next slide, please, Mark. And so moving on to the focus groups, we did conduct virtual focus groups via Zoom immediately after the surveys with sportswomen. And these groups consisted of a mix of hunters, sport shooters, and archery participants. And we made sure the focus group participants included good representation as far as a range of ages, ethnicities, and races, as well as representation from all 4 of the Afro regions. And the recruitment process included reaching out to potential participants via email and phone, and asking several brief screener questions to ensure they met the criteria for the focus groups. And we also made sure, of course, that everyone was able to access and use Zoom. We didn't want to lose anybody because of technical issues. And the focus groups were 2 hours in length. They had about 8 to 10 participants per group. And within those groups, a professional response management moderator used a discussion guide to drive the conversation. And in those conversations, we addressed basic attitudes and opinions on hunting, sport shooting, and archery, as well as other R3 topics that have been identified in the surveys that were conducted. And next slide, please. And then on this final methodology slide, I want to talk a bit about the next phase of the project as well. And the purpose of the next phase of the project is, again, to retain female participants. But this phase will do so by following up with them with a focus on their specific interests and experiences. And we're going to start with a workshop of R3 practitioners and event partners. And we're going to develop an inventory of outdoor programs and a calendar of when those events and programs are taking place. We'll then go back to the database of 10,000 women. And within that database, at this point, we have their contact information, we know their interests, we know whether or not they're beginners, intermediate, or advanced in terms of the activities that they participate in. And we're going to send emails and also do some phone calling to let them know about programs that are suitable for them. After that inventory, we're going to find those programs that are suitable for different types of outdoor participants. And we're going to find out which programs work best for them. We're going to reach out to them. And we're going to try to encourage them to attend those programs. And what we're trying to do is drive them to appropriate R3 programs that will ultimately retain them. So for example, just to put this in real world application, if I had only participated in 1 year of hunting in the last 5 and then just stopped participating, I would get a call saying, hey, Amanda, down in Lexington in July, there's this really great course that helps develop hunting skills for beginners. And we think it would be really great for you. And so then after we do that, we will continue, we'll do this with the entire database and just hope that this outreach and connecting these programs with these people will lead toward more hunting, more sport shooting, and more archery activities overall. And after we have done this outreach and attempted to get these women to continue to participate, we will do another survey to make sure the outreach and invitations worked and see how they moved along the outdoor recreation and adoption model continuum. So this next phase will also use a multimodal approach with emails and phone calls. And we'll find out which events women completed, how their activities and level of participation changed, how they rate their confidence and competence, which is so important in these activities. And we'll also try to understand which variables impacted their continued involvement in outdoor recreation. And then the last step of this phase will be that we will analyze that data and develop a report with the findings and recommendations, and perhaps present that in another webinar on these issues to see what we find and what kind of steps we can make moving forward. So I think that covers everything for methodology. Up next, Allison Lanier, who is our business manager and a research associate with Responsive Management, and she's been here for 25 years, is going to discuss some of the survey findings. So, Allie?
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the key findings from the 2022 women's study. This was a very large study, so there was a lot to cover. So we pulled out the most salient points. Mark, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so to understand ORAM requires understanding of 3 important things: motivations, encouragements, and constraints. And these 3 topics were covered in the survey instrument that we administered. For motivations, what would motivate a woman to participate in hunting, sport shooting, or archery? What would encourage them to go hunting, sport shooting, or do archery more, or to go more often? And for constraints, why don't they participate more? So I'm going to talk about each one of these for each of the 3 activities. Next slide. Okay, so the top reasons for hunting that fell out were to be in nature at an 8.6, and they were given 13, our respondents were given 13 potential reasons and asked to rate them on a 10-point scale. So to be in nature came to the top at 8.6, and for food at 8.2. And I think about what Judy was saying at the beginning, where she found hunting to be yoga for men. So that kind of correlates with that finding there. Next slide. Encouragements to hunting participation. The top items that would encourage a woman to participate in hunting: having a child you care ask to go hunting at 6.3, and better access to hunting areas at 6.2. Again, we rated or had respondents rate up to 24 potential encouragements, and they were randomly assigned 8 items to rate. They didn't obviously get all 24. The survey would have been really too long, and these 2 rose to the top. And we'll see that access is a common theme throughout these results. Okay, next slide. Constraints to hunting participation. We rated or had respondents rate 54 potential constraints, and really no constraint rated relatively high. The highest rated at a 4.4 was related to not having enough time, but many gave the constraints ratings of 0 or 1. So not a whole lot of constraints were named in the survey. Next slide. We did have another question related to constraints, where we listed 6 potential emotions in a survey question, and women were asked if they agreed or disagreed that the emotion describes how they feel when they go hunting. And 32% of women said that they feel nervous, and 15% of women feel intimidated. So this is why it's listed on the constraints slide. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the implications section when Andrea gets to that. Okay, next slide. Motivations for sport shooting. So again, there was 15 potential reasons or motivations for participating in sport shooting. What rose to the top was to become more comfortable with firearms at 8.2, and followed by for the sport or recreation. So this word comfortable will come up again and again throughout these results and in the implications as well. Next slide. Encouragements to sport shooting. Women's top items that would encourage sport shooting: number 1, being invited to go by a friend at 6.9. We saw this way back with the Step Outside program. If you're invited to go, you're more likely to go. So it's interesting to see it come up again here. Second, having a program that you know is conducted safely and in a controlled manner at 6.8. We've seen this in other studies as well. The key terms here are safe and controlled. I think another study had controlled environment, but we've seen that before. And the third point, better access to shooting areas or ranges. Again, that access theme coming up again at 6.7. And then finally, knowing you will feel comfortable or welcome while shooting at 6.6. Again, comfortable and welcome are key terms here on this slide. Okay, next slide. Constraints to sport shooting participation. Again, we had 48 potential constraints. Respondents were given a random 15 constraints to rate on a scale of 0 to 10. And really, there weren't a whole lot that came up as, we've got a 5.4, have other interests that are more important. And then the second one related to time, too busy with family obligations. But we asked this question in a different way. We also had an open-ended question asking, what would cause them to not, participate more. And lack of time and cost of ammo were the top listed in the open-ended section. So we thought that those were worth mentioning here, particularly cost of ammo. Okay, next slide. Constraints to sport shooting. Again, that question about emotions plays in here. We listed the 6 potential emotions that they may feel when participating in the sport. The emotions were nervous, intimidated, competent, excited, successful, and supported by other hunters. And they were asked if they agreed or disagreed that the emotion describes how they feel when participating in sport shooting. 36% felt nervous, feel nervous, 24% feel intimidated. So that's a really important finding that will come up again later. Okay, next slide, please. Motivations for archery. Top reasons for the challenge, 7.9. For the sport or recreation, 7.7. Respondents rated 15 potential reasons, and these clearly rose to the top as motivations for participation. Okay, next slide. On the section of mentoring, so one of the series questions asked what would help maintain or increase participation. And for hunting, sport shooting, and archery, all the top items that were rated had to do with mentoring or having the support of experienced participants. So that mentoring and support, it just really is important for all three of these activities, and something that we saw time and time again. Next slide. And again, on mentoring, we asked a question about how who they first went with when they participated in the activity, whether it be hunting, sport shooting, archery. And for all of them, it was father, spouse, partner, except for archery. It was a little different in that it was an organized group who first brought them into this, first took them shooting for archery, and followed by their father. So we're seeing, we've heard that the father, spouse, mentor relationship is really important. And we see it again here with this survey question. Okay, next slide. Participation in R3 programs. For the hunters, 36% of our women hunters in the study that were surveyed participated in either a hunting, shooting, or archery program. And about a quarter of those participants said that the program was designed for women. And about half participated and attended with their family. Okay, next slide. Future participation in R3 programs for hunting. When they were asked about their preferences for future programs, 44%, a substantial percentage of women would like a co-ed program, 37% a women spouse program, 33% women family program, and then you can read 31% women only, 26% adults only. Multiple responses were allowed, so they could have selected more than one of these items. And just a note on this slide that the results for the shooting programs were very similar to this one. So we saw, co-ed programs being very important for sporting, for sport shooting as well. Okay, next slide. Participation in R3 programs for shooting. 36% of sport shooters in the survey participated in the hunting, shooting, archery program. Actually, I think this slide is exactly just like the hunting one, that the results were the same here. We could have put them in one slide. A quarter of these participants said that the program was designed for women for shooting, and then about half of the participants attended with their family. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so program participation in general. R3 programs had success in getting participants to self-identify as either hunters, shooters, or archers. You could see that those before the program who identified as a hunter were 32%, but 47% did so after the program, identified as being a hunter. That's a jump of 15%. So our message here is that these programs are working in terms of getting people to identify as one of these three categories. Identifying as sport shooters, 24% did so before the program, 40% do so after the program. That's a jump of 16%. These are good numbers. And then identifying as an archer, 13% did so before the program and 25% do so after the program, which is a jump of 12%. So the message here is that these programs are working. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just really general highlights of what is in the full report. We have many more findings there. I think we're going to have a link available for both this PowerPoint and the report posted after the event. So just want to let you know that there's a lot more there. Next, Andrea Criscione is going to talk about the research implications. She's been a senior research associate at Responsive Management for 19 years. And welcome, Andrea.
Yep. Thank you very much, Allison. As she mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of these results. in relation to that outdoor recreation adoption model. Mark, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. There you can see the outdoor recreation adoption model. And we're going to, I'm going to start with the recruitment phase, the first stage of the model. It has important aspects that are awareness, interest, and trial. So in looking at that portion of the model, and looking back at what Allison just discussed for the results, as she mentioned, there were not a lot of constraints that were rated very highly as constraints. So most barriers are considered minor rather than major, and we would be able to overcome them in our program. So those barriers or constraints are not actually preventing trial of the activities as much as maybe they're influencing the decision to continue into the next phase, into the retention. So there are some safety issues that could be addressed during recruitment, and also to an extent during the retention stage that came up as a constraint. So safety issues are something we can consider moving forward. And then also in terms of the recruitment stage, we did find that a large majority of those who participated in multiple activities, meaning they participated in hunting and sport shooting and or archery, more than one of those three activities. If they participated in hunting first, they agreed that that hunting is an important reason they participated in the other activities, in shooting or archery. And this was not the case vice versa quite as strongly. So the point is that hunting is a better first activity to introduce people into the outdoor recreation activities in general, and getting them to move to another activity, to try sport shooting, to try archery. It seems to be a much stronger connection to start with hunting and move on to the other activities than to do one of the other activities and try to get people to move into hunting. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in the next phase of the model, we talk about retention, in which participants decide whether or not to continue. And then if they continue, they do so either with support or without support. Relevant to this portion of the model is that part of the survey that Allison was talking about earlier, where we actually explored women's feelings while participating in hunting or shooting. And I saw someone actually ask, what are all the feelings we asked about in the survey? So we did ask women to agree or disagree about the feelings they feel while hunting. And we asked about feeling excited while hunting or shooting, supported, competent, or successful. And those are the positive feelings that we would associate with motivation to continue participating. So if you're feeling those things, you'll be more likely to make that decision to continue and go hunting again or go sport shooting again. And then the negative feelings we asked about were feeling nervous or feeling intimidated. So those are those negative feelings that we would associate with constraints. Feeling that way would be more likely to prevent you from continuing to participate. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so so in terms of those feelings, the results Allie mentioned, but I'll go a little bit more into detail here. So feelings of excitement were already high among women hunters. Thus, we actually need to focus in our retention efforts on building feelings of competency, confidence, success, and autonomy. These were the feelings that did not rate as high as being among women hunters as them experiencing them while participating in their activities. So they were very excited to participate, but when they're actually out there, they're saying that, their levels of competency, confidence, success, and autonomy are not as strong maybe as they would like them to be. And so we need to focus on these in the retention stage to keep folks involved and to keep them participating in the activities. And likewise, we should seek to reduce those feelings of intimidation and nervousness. About a third of hunters and more than a third of sport shooters indicated that they had feelings of nervousness or feelings of intimidation when participating in their respective sports. So our 3 programs would do really well to focus on trying to reduce those feelings and factors associated with them feeling intimidated and nervous while participating. So as I mentioned, they're excited. They want to participate. We just got to focus on a way to address those other issues, build up those feelings of competency and confidence, and reduce those feelings of intimidation and nervousness. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. Okay, continuing to focus on the retention phase of the model. Our study found that support from other experienced hunters and sport shooters is very important, which you would probably expect, but it is a top-rated factor among participants for maintaining or increasing their participation. They actually rated it very, very highly as a factor that contributed to the reason that they continued to participate. We also found, and again, I think Allison mentioned this, that most women's mentors in hunting and sport shooting are important males in their lives, their fathers, their spouses. So this is how they're getting introduced into hunting and or sport shooting. And it is important to know that, as it's very tied to women's continued participation, and that we found, especially in the focus groups, that women were hesitant to go without their male mentor or their male partner in the activity sometimes. And that's probably related again to that lack of confidence and feeling of competency, where they feel like they need that male partner to go with them to continue. We also found that introduction at a younger age is important among women. As you would expect, they're more likely to continue if they started hunting and or sport shooting at a younger age. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. Okay, and now for the latter stage, to continue with those latter stages of the model with both retention and reactivation as we move forward, some things we have to do to continue to retain participants and to reactivate those lapsed participants is to address constraints. Again, Allison mentioned that a lot of the constraints weren't rated very highly as constraints, but at the same time, recognizing that we have a lot of churn and a lot of one-timers, we need to focus on addressing those things that we can address to get their continued participation or to bring them back to participating. We've talked about safety issues. We've mentioned increasing those feelings of competency and confidence and success. But there's also another constraint, which is access. And as many of you know, it's not a new thing to see access come up as a constraint, especially among hunters. With women in the study, though, we found that there was actually a pretty unique facet to the access constraint, and that many women were talking about, especially in the focus groups, about how their access for hunting is tied to their male partner or mentor. So, for instance, they started going hunting with their boyfriend. Well, their boyfriend took them hunting on land for a guy that they knew. And so when it comes down to whether a woman wants to go out alone, or say she breaks up with that boyfriend, whatever, she actually feels like she's lost access to that land. So access can be very much tied to that partner or that mentor, and that it seems that women view access through the lens of the connection that got them there in the first place. Some of their male friends have agreements, whether those be formal or informal, to access the land, and they just don't, they have the perception that they can't go do that alone. They can't go have access to that land without that connection through the male hunting partner. It could also be a comfort level thing. They want the person who got them to that point in the first place to go back with them. So anyway, that was a unique nuance we found to the access constraint that tends to come up for hunters, but this one seems to be particular to women. Next slide, please. So and in summary, our R3 efforts should build on those top motivations for participation that Allison had mentioned earlier when she was presenting her results. So each activity we looked at among women participants, hunting, sport shooting, archery, the reasons they participate, the top reasons were ranked a little bit differently. We had a little bit different top reasons in each activity. So for hunting, those top ones were to be in nature and for food. So they were more personal or basic needs. For sport shooting, the top reason for participating was to become more comfortable with firearms. So a very practical approach. And then for archery, the top reasons were for the challenge or for the sport or recreation. So more recreational. So those top factors differed a little bit for each activity. And so it's going to be important to keep that in mind as we create our 3 programs to bring people into the sport and to get them to continue participating. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. So just to review the R3 efforts moving forward, we should consider addressing important constraints when building R3 programs and opportunities, such as lack of time, that lack of access, particularly taking into account that nuance that many women view their access as tied to a male hunting partner, and then safety concerns. And we should most definitely focus on building those feelings of competency, confidence, success, and autonomy, as they are not as high as we would like them to be for women moving forward. And so we feel that if you build those feelings up, if we focus on building those feelings for women participants, that the decision to continue to participate will happen more often and will have a higher rate of participation. And then finally, seek to reduce those feelings of intimidation and nervousness that some women seem to have with relation to hunting and sport shooting, particularly into doing it on their own. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and again, our key takeaways today for what should be our most important retention goals moving forward with our 3 efforts, again, is that we should definitely concentrate on developing programs and opportunities for women that help them feel more comfortable, prepared, successful or confident, capable, confident, and more autonomous or independent. So next, we'll move into taking any questions for a little bit of time that we have here.
Mark, were there any final kind of key pieces you'd like to share before we head into the Q&A?
I think they did a fantastic job really taking a lot of data and boiling it down to a few things. What we're seeing is a lot of women coming in, and they're excited, they want to participate, and there's some internal barriers once you start, and you all know what those are. And all of the stories that we heard from Judy and that we're going to hear in terms of the program managers are all, in my opinion, going to fall in those 5 buckets in terms of how we do things. So no, whatever time we have, we'd love to answer any questions. And the other thing is that I know there were some questions about how to get the report, and certainly we can get people phase 1 report, and then also this webinar as well, because they worked really hard developing it and boiling down just tons of information into some things that we thought would really make sense and put everything in perspective. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Excellent information. And as somebody who is an R3 practitioner and works in this field all of the time, both as a mentor and as a mentee, this information is driving home exactly the kind of things that I'm going to be using to inform my practice. And I know that there are hundreds of people currently on this call who are resonating with the information that you shared currently as well. With that, we've got questions pouring in. We will get to the questions that we have with the time that we are allowed, and the ones that we're not able to get to as part of this discussion, we'll try to follow up with in the Q&A platform. So with that, There's a quick question about, did your data assess ethnicity at all?
Yeah, great question. With any study, you always have sort of one objective and you hone in on that. But if anybody's interested, we definitely can run that. You can run this data in a million different ways. Think of data as a guitar, and you can play pretty much any instrument and any song from that. And so if somebody's got something on racial issues, on race, or, we did present it regionally. We promised the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies would do this regionally. So this information is available regionally, but that can be done. But that song can be played.
Wonderful. So kind of back up to the top part of as you were giving kind of an initial overview in the introduction, Mark, the initial question came in of, how does female churn relate to male churn?
Yeah, great question. And that was sort of some of the numbers that we were showing, that women are churning faster than men. They're coming in. Remember when Ali talked about, we asked 25, 30 constraints. Well, is this constraining you from coming in? Not at the time of doing it, but coming in. The numbers were in the 3s and the 4s. Yeah, not an issue, not an issue, not an issue. People want to be involved. They're excited and they come in. But it's when they start sort of experiencing some of this stuff that they run into those issues of concern and confidence and competence and things like that. So I think that's really that's why we want to focus in on the retention aspect. Yeah, maybe some reactivation, but it's what the difference between sort of retention and reactivation is definitional. Is somebody not avid anymore after not doing it for 2 years? Well, a lot of people do it. They'd quit a couple of years and they do it later. In fact, some of the nuances involved with this are great, and I probably could detail you into complete boredom. But when we talk about a one-timer in the database, that person doesn't necessarily mean a first-timer. They're a one-timer, but they might not be a one-timer or a first-timer, because we looked at 5-year chunks. They could be in at one time, but have participated 5 or 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the big key takeaway is there is high levels of interest. There's great programs out there, but once we get them, we need to instill certain things. That access is one of them, but that information that they continue to be independent when they do it.
Thank you for continuing to hit on those key pieces. And it's no secret, for a long time, the archery community has recognized that we've been very heavy on the retention end and have not invested as much necessary effort on the recruitment end. I apologize, I misspoke. We've been very heavy on the recruitment end and not as invested or as successful on the retention and reactivation component. And so this gives us, I think, a lot of key pieces to start looking at what does retention truly look like in our practice.
Exactly. And that's, again, that the original question that person asked was a good one. I mean, look, even in one of the best states, Maine, with Judy, she doesn't have much of that retention gender gap as most other states. Other states, it's 2, 3, 4 times that women are appearing one time in those databases in a 5-year period. Right. And you boil it down to a 2-to-1 ratio of men to women on that particular attribute.
Along those lines, an additional question that came in was around your five key retention goals you hit on a couple of times, what we should be aiming for as major takeaways. One of the questions that was posed was, yes, we're talking about women in this specific study, and you may only be able to answer in the realm of this study, but is it possible that they'd be any different for men or other new hunters or target shooters or archery participants?
Yeah, great question. I do think there are unique attributes to women participating in these activities. I definitely. Would there be spillover effect in terms of you teaching? Of course, I mean, think about the stuff that Ali presented. That I think, and I can't wait to hear Christine talk. I've been working with her for I don't know how long, so 20 years or so, but I can't wait to hear her talk about her take on some of these issues, because there are definitely unique attributes of women, without a doubt. But also, I think that dependence on men for access, I mean, that just came up over and over again. And it was frustrating, women who deserted hunting because their husband had that access. They could go to those people. I mean, yesterday, Judy made this great point about, Well, a big burly guy can go up in a farm in Iowa, knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you. Can I maybe hunt on your land this fall? And, I'll take care of it. I'm an ethical hunter." That's a heck of a lot different from a male versus a female. And think about that. I mean, even going a step further, we're doing some studies with African Americans, with blacks. Imagine how difficult it is for a black man to go and knock on that same door. So are some of these issues unique to some of these populations? I would say, heck yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that. Got into some of the more practical application, and this may be a more pertinent question for Christine when we get into your section, but there was a question about, okay, we're saying that nervousness is something important for us to address in our programming. What does that look like? How do we decrease nervousness?
Well, I think Christine will be able to do that, but I think that there's some things. I think addressing some of these issues up front are really important. I mean, even things like the aspect of killing and all of the issues that surround of taking a life. And so now that we've identified these, and when Amanda talked, I mean, you can see how amazing she is in terms of running the nuts and bolts of the research and how careful we are. And these things come up over and over, but you have to overtly address them. And so in that case, I think I'm going to defer a little bit to Christine on that. But I think addressing them that it's okay to be nervous. Everybody who's hunted or shot, or especially for me, archery, those feelings, and it's okay to talk about those. And I think that those are unique to women in terms of wanting to talk about those and being a little bit more open about talking to those than men. I mean, there's definitely gender issues. We all care about conservation. We all love to do this, but there are definitely issues that I think are more unique to women than men, but I think are also a little bit more easily overcome, because I do think from a gender perspective, it's easier for women to talk to each other about, I was really nervous when I was about to shoot that deer, versus males doing that. So great questions.
Thank you. One of the next ones I thought was really interesting is, did you find, and were you able to correlate a connection between women that felt intimidated and nervous with women that might prefer women-only programs as opposed to co-ed programming?
What a great question. That person has a place on the responsive management staff. We should run that. We didn't, but we will. That's a brilliant question.
Thank you. Just going through, we do have quite a few questions. We will not have time for all of them, and we will try to address as many of them in the Q&A function as we can today, or follow up afterwards with additional questions. The next question I'd like to ask is, with regard to the constraints, safety concerns are mentioned. Can you talk about what those safety concerns are? Is it more firearm safety related, feelings of safety based on the instructors? Is it simply safety from the standpoint of being a woman in the outdoors? What kinds of definitions did you work on through the study?
Great, another great question. They were different for hunting and shooting. And, we primarily work with hunting, fishing, shooting, archery. And it has always bothered me to talk about hunting and fishing or hunting and shooting, because they're just different. These are just really different activities. From a safety perspective, we had stories yesterday amongst the folks who are presenting today, and we had real world stories where one of the speakers said, I think it was Judy, had a really scary and harrowing experience with a male approaching her with a gun in the wilderness. And then another woman who was on our practice session yesterday said, well, tell me if I'm misquoting, but she said, I've had to pull a gun twice on somebody, to sort of pull it out. And so, are those more unique to women than men? Yes. And so the answer is that safety issue is of real concern. And the thing is I don't think I'm as qualified to talk about it as our next speakers. And so I think I'd rather defer to them, because I think those are issues. I can tell you what the data says, but no one's going to tell it better than our speaker, Judy, and then the people who are going to follow us, who tell real world stories about things that we need to address. I will say, on the other hand, with shooting is different. Shooting involves a firearm. We know that about half, 43% of households have a firearm. those in the US, those people are comfortable with firearms and pulling out a firearm, checking it, making sure it's not loaded, making sure you don't point it in, in a direction you're not supposed to be. That is second nature. But almost like Leopold said in Sand County Almanac, there are people who can live with wildlife and people who cannot. We have half the population who knows everything about firearms. So, you know what I'm saying? They're comfortable. But that means another half isn't at all. They think you buy a gun and it's going to jump up and shoot somebody or something like that. And so that fear of safety and stuff is of real concern. And it's why in every study we've done for 30 years on shooting, that safety comes up as being the number one issue. And the number one words at work, safe and controlled. Think about those words Ali said, safe and controlled.
I think to the spirit of both of the questions I see along that theme, it's more about if different kinds of safety were measured within this study and defined, or if safety was lumped as one concept.
No, we have that data, and it'll be in the report, and it'll be it'll even be more so in the focus group report. Andrea, you did those focus groups?
Yeah. I was actually going to just interject when you were done. So I think in terms of the survey data, so yes, we had, safety concerns in the list of constraints asked about, but it was also brought up in the open-ended. I think in the open-ended question responses, we saw both. We saw people who just general safety concerns. You're talking about being around firearms and that type of thing, but people also brought up intimidation and harassment while in the field. And then in the focus groups, I like it's pulling out an anecdote, but I had one participant who had a great way of phrasing it. So she said it was about concerns of being a woman alone in the field. And her point was, if there are hunters out there who are willing to poach and break other hunting laws and regulations, such as shooting from a vehicle, then why would they think twice about harassing or hurting a woman they come across in the field? So I just thought that was a great illustration on her part in the focus group about how it's this deep-seated concern about their own personal safety in terms of being in the field alone and being around other people they do not know who have firearms.
Excellent. And I think along those lines, we aren't here to perpetuate negative stereotypes about men. We aren't here to paint with broad brushes, but we are here to represent the perceptions of some people that were involved in this study who are expressing various concerns and are very real concerns and perceptions that we may engage with in our programming. So I thank you for being able to speak to those definitions in a meaningful way and be able to represent that information for us. We've got time for just a couple of more questions. Looking at setting up health, the question is in relation to setting healthy expectations as a mentor to help with some of the nervousness with new hunters and how important that is. Curious about, we tend to relay as a community that taking a monster buck is what's expected. As most of us know, it's not easy and can lead to disappointment. Can see people becoming uninterested due to not having realistic expectations. And so kind of as you look at some of these key takeaways of what success looks like, was that kind of perception relayed in your focus groups of, taking a monster buck as it relates to success?
I can take that first, and then Andrea. Expectations can ruin anything. I travel a lot. I don't travel as much anymore, but I'm over 3 million miles with Delta, so I spend a lot of time traveling. And sometimes it might have even been Amanda years ago when she was asking about something and about going on a trip, and I said just don't have any expectations. Expectations ruin everything. And because they do, if you think you're going to go to Italy and it's going to be exactly like this, or this wine is going to taste exactly like this, or this relationship is going to be exactly like this, you're screwed. So the thing is that over the years, just in hunting in general, we've always tried to press the whole idea of what's called a multiple satisfactions approach. It was actually developed in the 70s by a guy named John Handy, who sort of was one of the original human dimensions people. And it's so important to talk to people about all of the things that hunting or shooting are about, the nature, the camaraderie, and all of those things. So I think that in a lot of the hunter ed courses that we've worked with over the years have started to incorporate that in. And also, quite frankly, to talk about expectations with turkey hunting. I mean, how many of us have gone turkey hunting? Well, I'm looking at Mandy Harling. I was just totally doesn't apply. I was going to say, how many of us have gone turkey hunting and come home empty-handed? You know, I know Mandy never, you know, so, and then after 2 or 3 times, you're like, man, what's wrong with me? And then you start looking at the numbers and you're like, look, only 20% in some states are bringing home a turkey every year. And I'm like, okay, I'm not as inept as I was thinking I was going to be. And so I think addressing expectations up front is really important. And I think talking about the multiple satisfactions is really important. I mean, we keep coming back to Judy and all of her, really excellent presentation to begin with. What does she talk about? She goes small game hunting. Small game hunting is a really great way to start. And there's been some really good, important research from Dr. Lauren Chase, who's talked about, let's get more people involved with small game because you can have a little bit more success or whatever. So the final thing I would say is that in having looked at, so much of the stuff over the years, I do think that women are going to be easier from the expectation game than men, because I do think, and I think that I want to be careful here, but I do think that it's more of a male thing to want to go out and get the biggest buck. And we didn't see that with most females. And again, I got to be really careful here when you start talking like that, but I didn't see the out of proportion expectations with women that I've seen with men over the years in focus groups and stuff. The point is really good. I think the larger point is talking about expectations up front in these programs. Judy, I think Judy has something to say about this, or you wanted to talk, or Christine?
Yeah, I did. Am I on mute? No.
Nope,
okay.
You're good. Go for it, Christine.
Okay, good. The one thing might be the harvest expectations, but what I can tell you, and this is just experiential, and why we started training our instructors early on and becoming an outdoors woman, because you might have some instructors who just think they're going to wing it. Okay. Women have got the brochure in front of them, and they're looking at what you told them they were going to do in the description. Okay. I see a bunch of you grinning, they signed up for something and they expect to have those expectations met. No, like backslapping, we're going to wing it, we're going to tell a bunch of jokes and we're going to get to the end. No, they expect to get what they signed up for. And I think in terms of nervousness, one of the things we can do in our R3 programming, or that shooting ranges can do, or lodges who are, inviting women to come and do outdoor activities, on your website or in your information, lay out what are the accommodations like? What can you expect for restroom facilities? What kind of cleanliness is happening in your operation? Because I do think that women have expectations on these things, and they may be less tolerant than men on some of these things, and they may be nervous and intimidated so that they don't even sign up because they can't determine ahead of time if they're going to be comfortable and safe when they get there.
Thank you for adding that. And I think before we get too long, I know Commissioner Camuso needs to head off, so I just wanted to open it up to you really quickly.
Thank you, Taniya. I just wanted to thanks everyone for joining today and for inviting me to participate. This is a really meaningful conversation for me. I learned a lot today, and I appreciate all the questions and all the data presented today. And good luck with the rest of the program. And I've got to go meet with my legislative committee. So thanks again. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you for setting the tone for us today. So with that, I've got room for one more question, and then we're going to be heading off. Actually, 2 more. One was there a breakdown run by age bands by any chance in the study?
By age?
Age bands and age demographic.
Yeah, we can do that. Again, our original PowerPoint a couple days ago was like 3 hours long. And so Allie and I and Andrea and Amanda were looking at it, we're like, this is really long. And we cut down what you're seeing, believe it or not, what we presented was a tenth of what's out there. And so because of that, we did focus solely on women in the broader demographics, some geographic, but this data can be broken down by age. I can tell you that, so we did a little bit, but not as much as you could. Again, you could run this data for years, but the one piece of data that was age related that Ali had presented was the whole issue of initiation. And we've known for 30 or 40 years, since Dan Decker was doing his original research up at Cornell and the Human Dimensions Research Group up there, that, when you start people at a younger age, they're more likely to be retained. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And over the past 10 or 20 years, we want to do adult stuff because we're seeing more and more adult onset. And it's a really important market to do. And I've been involved with a lot of conversations on why we should do that. But we still need to know that the bottom line is that when the younger they start, the more likely they are to be retained. Now, the question is whether that's a real age related. It might just be a mentoring issue. That if I grew up in a hunting or shooting family, I've been doing this since I've been 6 or 7 years old. And so is it really related to age, or is it really related to that super great mentoring attention that you get from a father or a mother or a brother or somebody who really knows it? So, but there are definitely some age related issues involved, as well as just in general that we know. We all think, oh, we're going to get old, we're going to go hunting and fishing and shooting when we retire. But the data just doesn't show that the older people get, the more likely they are to just drop out. So a couple of sort of beginnings and ends on the age stuff.
Awesome. Along with that, and thank you for addressing that question. One more question that was brought up was there any comparison to people who live in more urban areas as opposed to more rural residential areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, great question to end on. Again, we know that if you grow up in a rural area in a hunting family or a shooting family, that you're going to do that most of your life from a percentage basis. But now we have, people moving out of rural areas, urban areas continue to grow, and a lot of our market is going to be in those urban areas. So know that there's huge differences, especially from a cultural difference and an expectation standpoint. So yeah, the answer is yes, there are huge differences. And the world's not like it was 50 years ago. We do a course on demographics and demographic changes, and the 5 big demographic changes that are taking place that are changing our world, that already have changed our world. And a move from rural to urban is one of the most important for a variety of reasons when it comes to conservation in general, but specifically the initiation of hunting, shooting, fishing, and other activities.
Fantastic. And it sounds like this report has so much more for us to chew on, even beyond this. But what I'm really excited to do, and just wanted to thank Responsive Management for queuing up the next portion of this conversation for us, is dig in on how all of these results lead us to implementing change in our practice. We want to be effective. We want to be efficient. We're not threatened by change. Our job is to serve our community in the best way we possibly can. And there is no other body of research like the one we were just shared. I mean, it's tremendous to have this kind of information from 10,000 women across our communities telling us what their needs and barriers are. In a data-driven sense, we have a chance to improve our programming. And so with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Christine Thomas, formerly with the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point for 40 years. She's an incredible asset to this project and is now had experience as a professor of resource management and then was the dean for the College of Natural Resources. And in addition, we have her to thank for the creation of the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, which we are all familiar with. So Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for not only helping to facilitate and bring about this research, but also now launching us into a portion of the conversation where we get a chance to talk about implementation. Where do we go from here?
Okay, thanks. And thanks everybody for coming out. And I'd like to thank all of our many partners from last year, the NGOs, the partners on the grant, the state agencies who helped us get to this point. If you hadn't worked with us, we wouldn't have our 10,000 woman sample that we got this good information out of. So just to recap a few messages here and make a couple of comments from the research. First of all, women like the R3 programming that you're doing. We got lots of good comments on that. And so the message there is keep up the good work. Secondly, they wish you were offering more. One of the access issues wasn't just access to public land or access to a shooting range. It was access to R3 programming. In our focus groups, we had women who actually told us, oh, I can't find a single program to go to in my state. So that's an access issue that you could think about. And I just noticed in the questions, somebody said, well, women want co-ed programming. Well, I think that we should be careful about jumping to conclusions, and I think Mark would agree with me on this. Just because 46% of the women want co-ed programming, we need to go back, I think, and parse that data. Who are those women that want that? Are they women who went to something else first? And because they liked it, then they thought, gee, maybe my partner would like to come and do something like this with me. So I think we need to, and then we also need to remember that if 46% of the women would prefer co-ed programming, you still have another 44% or 54%, whatever it is, of the women who don't prefer that kind of programming. So I think the message here is not one size fits all, and not one size fits each individual wherever they are on the R3 continuum. So I think be careful about jumping to conclusions based on one line on a slide when we maybe don't know enough about who exactly gave that response, age, race, experience level, and what have you. They would like they would do more hunting and shooting if they felt more confident and competent. That would be the one take-home line from the whole day if you don't remember one other thing. So things that you could do to increase them feeling more competent and more confident would help them become more frequent shooters and hunters. Some of the issues were safety related or intimidation related, and I think we talked about that in the questions and answers. There are a whole range of things that fit into intimidation and whether or not the person is feeling safe. And if you ask the question, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Well, the answer to that is yes. It's all those things. Anything that you can do to make, to help them deal with feeling more safe. And we're not asking you to do whole new R3 programs, but if you could incorporate, say you're doing a women in the outdoors program, if you could incorporate a section in there on personal safety or things that you can do to be more safe out in the environment as part of your teaching, I think that will help. Access, another access issue that came up over and over again, not just access to ranges, but access to not just the expensive ammunition, but access to ammunition. In the R3 surveys where I coded in the open-ended responses, access to ammunition was a huge issue. And I think that was a huge issue for all of us. And hopefully that is sort of resolving itself now. I'm seeing more ammunition on the shelves, but that was clearly on the minds of our survey respondents when they were filling out the surveys, is that they couldn't find ammunition and that they couldn't afford it at the prices that it was at. So what you've heard today is results from our first project, and this webinar is the first step in project 2. And what we're going to try to do is test whether or not, if you provide, if we can get information on your R3 programs to the women who participated in phase 1, will they come? If you build it, will they come? And then if you incorporate things into your programs that we know are issues, reducing nervousness, feelings of intimidation, access, safety, if you incorporate some of those things, if you give them an opportunity to practice things they learned in the beginning programs, more shooting, more field dressing, more familiarity with equipment, if you give them a chance to practice those things because they've come to you more times, will that increase their confidence and competence? And will that increase their participation and their identification with our hunting and shooting communities? That we're essentially doing a nationwide experiment right now, using the database that we had before. So how can you help us? Well, first of all, we're going to ask everybody to send us your R3 programs and to identify for us whether they're women focused or whether they're generally focused. And we're going to try to figure out how to get that information out to our 10,000 participants and anybody else who'd like to have that information. And then we're going to go back and survey these folks at the end of the program and see whether or not your efforts have had an effect. And so for those of you, that's for everybody. And then for those of you who helped us by providing our sample to begin with last year, we'll be reaching out to you specifically to try to get you to provide for us your calendar of events for the next year. And you can contact us. Taniya is going to put information on how you can get your information to us in the chat. Okay, in the chat, and so that you can start to interact with us and help us get information out to your folks. So we're basically recruiting for you for your R3 programs this next year, and hopefully we can help each other be successful as we go on. So again, thank you very much for everything you've done for us, for everything you're doing every day in the community, for the things that we all love to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Taniya to introduce our panel. Mark?
Yeah, great work, Criscione. Thank you so much. I was just going to follow up on, there was some concern about the whole, co-ed versus this or that. But that's at the very heart of this study. Is we started out by saying one size does not fit all. There are some women that want this. There are some women that want this. There are some women that want that. And that's this project. We're not going to just everybody go to one this or everybody do that. We're going to go back to that database and look to see where people are on that continuum and what their preferences are, and then target them with that. So yeah, some women want co-ed, some women don't. And we know who they are, so we can go in and target that. So I just wanted to add that. So thanks, Criscione.
Thank you for pointing to that. And I think throughout all of the studies where we were looking at any specific demographic, regardless of whether they belong to our long tenured relationship, folks that are engaging in hunting and shooting sports, or folks that are new on the landscape, that any demographic is not a monolith, right? There are many differences and diversity within each demographic. And so if anything, the survey is showing us that even within women, of course, there are broad needs, there are broad barriers, and there are broad specific things that individuals vary on. So I thank you for pointing to that. As we move ahead, and thank you, Christine, for launching us into this next step of the conversation. I'm really excited to have experts from our field, people who administer programs and have experience and expertise working with female-focused R3 initiatives, join us in this conversation. We have a broad array of folks who will be sharing with us some of their best practices and things that they've learned from their programs as R3 practitioners. And so with that, I'm going to introduce each of them here at the beginning. They'll each spend some time talking about and addressing a few key questions as part of this discussion. And once all 5 of them are done sharing about their lessons learned from their program, we'll have a follow-up Q&A that will include questions for them as well as for Dr. Christine Thomas. So with that, the questions that everybody is addressing include what some of their biggest takeaways are for their program, how they reached their demographic, specifically what kind of marketing and outreach, what kind of follow-up continuing with support opportunities or mentorships were shared, and if there were any lessons learned. And I may have forgotten one in there. I don't have it directly in front of me, so remind me if I skip that. So with that, I'm so happy to welcome back Marissa Jensen with Pheasants Forever and Quails Forever, who works at the national level with Women on the Wing program. We have Amy Hall with Tennessee Wildlife Federation. She is on the board for Wilderness and is the founder for founder of the Her Wild Outdoors podcast. I was going to get it out of my mouth sooner or later. We have Mandy Harling joining us today, who is the Director of Education and Outreach with NWTF, and she is with Women in the Outdoors program and able to share some of the information with us about that. We have Julia Plugi with Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. She not only is intimately involved with becoming an outdoors woman, but is also part of the She Goes Outdoors multi-state project that involves podcasts and subscription boxes, and now next steps opportunities that lead back into Bo. And we have Desiree Holmberg, who is involved in the Collegiate Becoming an Outdoor Woman program in Minnesota. So with that, we'll have Marissa Jensen kick us off first.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taniya. So I'm going to share a little bit about our organization's Women on the Wing initiative. And Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever's Women on the Wing initiative was launched officially in 2018. And it was created in an effort to inspire and provide opportunities for women to become engaged and dynamic conservationists. And so, collectively as mentors, volunteers, staff, and others, we work to deliver local and national events that provide participants with their own path to the uplands. So that could be either through R3 Learn to Hunt and Learn to Shoot events, or by providing habitat education and workshops for women landowners, farmers, ranchers, and conservation leaders across the country. And it's most importantly, the initiative creates a community of women who are dedicated to advancing Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever's conservation and habitat mission. Women on the Wing is also, it's a major focus within Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the incredible depth and breadth of talent of our staff. Women are represented at every level of our organization, with the exciting recent announcement of our upcoming president and CEO, Marilyn Vetter, to a diverse board of directors. We have representation within our governmental affairs team who advocate for conservation in DC, to our remarkable delivery team of natural resource professionals, as well as R3 and education and outreach coordinators. And it was from the guidance of these team members and volunteers over the years where Women on the Wing programs were developed. And they were developed to connect the dots for participants between hunting and conservation. We want women to understand how they're part of the bigger picture. So our efforts and work are really about creating conservation advocates and increasing relevancy to improve the future of upland habitat and wildlife in North America. So when I think about the questions that you asked, and why our programs and our initiative work, I think about our efforts to build community. That's a word that I'm going to use a lot here. And I've heard it before with Director Judy Camuso and everyone else here. Within a thriving community, people encourage one another and help each other out. That's where we see retention in our programs. Community appears to be the most prevalent within our chapters, multi-day hunt experiences, and then social networking events, just to name a few here. So I'm going to dive in just a little bit deeper into what those specific focus areas are and where we see that community being built. So we currently have 10 Women on the Wing chapters, and that number is consistently growing. And then we have over 750 traditional Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever chapters across the country, where many of these host women's focused events, or they have Women on the Wing subcommittees, and even have specific Women on the Wing volunteer positions as part of that chapter. So, even if they don't identify specifically as a Women on the Wing chapter, there still is a ton of work taking place for the initiative. And chapters and volunteers are truly pivotal to the scalability of all of our programs. Their passion and dedication and hard work is really how we're able to move the needle. Chapters also provide the building blocks for introducing new participants, whether young or old, into conservation hunting and shooting sports. I mentioned the multi-day events. So those are exactly as they sound, multiple days of education. Sometimes that's in a row, like a weekend, and then sometimes these are developed as a series. But the most important part of these events is that they're multiple days with the same participants. These events will cover a variety of topics. So everything from safety to learn to shoot and learn to hunt opportunities. There's cooking classes, social gatherings, gear nights, biology and ecology lessons, map and access discussions, and so much more. But really, the fun thing is where we have seen the magic truly happen at these events is sitting around the campfire and having participants share meals with one another. I think this time really allows for everything they've learned to just soak in, give us a pause to just really think through all of the amazing things that were learned. And it also allows an opportunity for participants to get to know one another on a more personal level. And that's where that community, again, that really starts to develop, grow, and thrive. We also encourage participants and mentors, it's completely voluntary if they're comfortable, to share contact information to keep that network going strong long after the event. So we've seen staff and volunteers continue on as mentors, taking participants on late season hunts, inviting them to organize meetups for public land hunting days, encourage individuals to join chapters, or inviting participants back to unique events like reunion hunts so the relationships developed can continue. We have some really fun examples of women who have started their path with our organization and our Women on the Wing initiative by joining a Learn to Hunt event for the first time. And then they become a volunteer, and then they become a mentor, and then a chapter leader, and some have even started their own chapters. These women just continue to strive to give back to their community, and it's incredible to see them as role models for the future of not only Women on the Wing, but women in conservation. Just to quickly highlight kind of the scope of our Learn to Hunt and Learn to Shoot events. So in 2022, we hosted over 1,600 participants through our Women on the Wing identified events. So this number doesn't capture women participants that attended traditional Learn to Hunt and Learn to Shoot events, just those specifically earmarked as part of the initiative. So we're really excited to continue to see that number grow. Community is also built through engagement opportunities. So think pint nights, or we have women wine and wild game events. And these really connect the dots between hunting, conservation, and everybody's favorite, the food. These events allow for chapter volunteers and staff to find like-minded individuals and invite them to be a part of the organization and the initiative. Here, chapters and staff can share information about upcoming events, volunteer opportunities, and then we also have a national Women Wine and Wild Game event at Pheasant Fest and Quail Classic. So here's my shameless plug to come visit me next month in Minneapolis for this event to celebrate our incredible way for women to connect. We have seen so many friendships and networks built at this event that continue long after, from women of all walks of life. So it's really exciting to see that community built. We also build community through our public outreach. So everything from our Women on the Wing blog page on our Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever websites to highlighting and elevating women's voices in podcasts and journal stories. We are really excited to share unique perspectives and unique voices from new hunters to seasoned veterans, landowners, and conservation professionals. It's something that we're just really passionate about. When we look at scaling our programs, I know I mentioned chapters, but I also need to highlight our partners on both state and national levels. We recognize the power of working together and know that we can impact far more individuals together than we could ever accomplish alone. Partners make that happen, and we're so grateful for each and every one of them. We also work really hard to provide funding opportunities for our staff and chapters to host events through support from a variety of means, so partners, grants, donations. Our team works really, really hard to minimize costs as any barrier for participation. And last but not least, our conservation story is imperative to everything we do. And we make sure to provide habitat and conservation education as part of every event, whether it's big or small. So some examples of what this would look like would be, what does upland cover look like? What do wild birds need to survive on the landscape? What are they eating during what time of year? And how do habitat and management play into everything? And why does that matter to everyone, regardless if you're a hunter or not? We bring in our conservation career professionals to highlight the work that they do and how it's connected, just to continue to keep everything coming full circle. We know upland hunting isn't just about a bird in the hand, right? It's about the entire ecosystem and the little things. And so we want to help participants recognize that these smaller parts make up a larger whole. It's about taking care of our resources to ensure they exist for the next generation to enjoy. This message is so important to include in everything we do. It not only helps participants identify quality places to hunt and gives them a better understanding of their surroundings and what to look for. That's hopefully an area to build confidence and competence, but it also reinforces the why, the importance of conservation as a hunter, and hopefully this inspires participants to be a part of their own, as well as the larger conservation success story. That message is really empowering to someone who's just getting started. It's empowering to many of us, or hopefully all of us to this day. And this message matters to our participants. I've talked now at length about building community and how sharing the conservation message connects us all. And we encourage our participants to then tell that story afterwards to others, recruit someone new, and then eventually we hope they will become the teachers and the mentors themselves. But how do we do that? So we invite them to be members. We invite them to be part of our chapters and our organization and the initiative. We encourage them to take part in our organization's Hunter Mentor Pledge and to welcome others to become involved. And then we encourage all our staff and volunteers to always provide event attendees with next steps, because the last thing that we ever want is for our participants to leave asking us what's next. All right, I will pass it back to you, Taniya, and look forward to hearing the rest of the panel.
That was great. I felt it. I was taking notes while you were talking. Thank you so much for sharing your information. I dropped a link to Women on the Wing in the chat that went out to everyone. And I would encourage each of the panelists, as you present, if you feel comfortable, please share your contact information. I'm already getting questions for follow-up on what it takes to start a chapter and what the cost for events are and those kinds of things. So Marissa, please throw your if you're comfortable, please share your contact information. And everyone else on the panel, please, if you feel comfortable to do so, share your information about your programs as well as your personal contact. Next up, we have Amy Hall. So please share with us the things that you have learned and your unique insights.
Thank you, Taniya. And I just want to thank you for this invitation, because there's something about having a group of women on a panel about women. I mean, can we just celebrate that for a second? Because I've been in the outdoor community now for 12 years, and it has come a long way in that 12 years. And I think that men can sympathize with us. They can't empathize. They can't understand where we're coming from. So having a panel of women be able to be voices in this is just amazing. So I got that out of the way. My experience is a little bit different. I began hunting 11 years ago solo. So I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a support system. I was in a tree stand by myself, failing over and over and over. Eventually, success happened, But it wasn't for years down the road did I get connected with community. So starting the podcast was my way of connecting with women in the outdoors. I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to hear how they were doing it, so maybe I could do it better. I wanted to hear how a single mom could handle this, how a grandmother could handle this, how a person working full time, how a woman who is a CEO of her company or a leader in her community, how she was doing this. But I also wanted to find that common thread that all of the women had. And it was amazing to see that over the past 3 years of all the women that I've talked to, we all have this common thread, and it's threefold. And I'm going to get into that, but what everybody was hoping for and what everybody strives for is everything that we're hearing out of this data. It's looking for connection. It's looking for community. I love those words because that's what I was searching for as a first-time hunter. They're looking for education because we as women like to know it all, not because we're afraid to fail. I don't think women are afraid to fail. It's because we strive for success. And of course, success is different for everybody, but that is what we strive for and what we do. But then we also need to find that core reason of why we're doing it. So all of these things, all three of these things have an emotional tie to it because we as women are emotional. And if we don't find that core reason, if we don't find that emotional connection to a community, and if we don't feel safe and competent and confident in where we are in education for what we are trying to do, we're not going to continue. We just won't. And so having these conversations with women along the way, retention has been a big conversation over the past 3 years. Why would I continue doing this? If I had not started these conversations with women, I probably would not be hunting now. And so it's really interesting to see how it's evolved over the past couple of years, how these groups are popping up that are focused on not just recruiting people in, but keeping them there. And honestly, it's just communicating that out. It's being able to say, these people are here for you, whether it is a BOW event, if it is a Pheasants Forever event, if it's an Artemis event, those are strictly focused on women. If it's, and I'm going to plug Wilderness, I'm on the board, I stand behind them. I love their mission of inclusion and safety and feeling comfortable with who you are in the outdoors. Color in the outdoors, Afro outdoors, like Latino outdoors, like all of these groups of people are our support system. So you've got your agency, you've got your NGOs, you have these organizations, and those are the programs that we talk about, we point people to. So working for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, we handle Hunters for the Hungry, we handle our Scholastic Clay Target program, but we also have this awesome hunting and fishing academy. We partner with our agency, Jennifer Wisniewski. She's amazing. We love her here in the state of Tennessee and all over in the R3 community. Her heart is in it. Our heart is in it. And it's neat to see a whole state come together and find people who want to learn how to be in the outdoors and how to do it well, and connect it to conservation and connect it to their why and connect it to that emotional tie. So I think if I were to go back to me as a first-time hunter, getting out there solo, there's so many wishes that I have for wanting to have that community, that support system, other women beside me, walking me through it. But at the same time, I was allowed a moment to see what my first reasoning, my first emotional push to being in the outdoors was. And now I can see over the past 11 years how that has evolved. It went from being in nature, which was one of my first desires, that core reason to put meat on the table as well for my kids. And it has evolved over time into a passion for getting other women in the outdoors, for getting other people in the outdoors. And it's those conversations through podcasting and storytelling that create this ability to relate to each other. And I think that's what we're all craving, is a way to relate, to have community, to learn everything that we can in a comfortable situation. We've said comfortable a lot, and I think that needs to be defined a little bit better. When I think comfort, it isn't necessarily that I need a 5-star hotel. It's that I need to walk into an event and see another woman. It's that I need to see somebody there that looks like me, like we have been talking about in our pictures and videos and everything else. It needs to be, it needs to transfer into events, education, situations where there is another woman like me in there. And that's a comfort level. I shouldn't have to walk into a situation and say it's my responsibility to feel comfortable, to make myself feel comfortable. I had a friend who told me that recently. It is not that individual's responsibility to make themselves feel comfortable. It's us as organizations. That's our responsibility, is to make somebody feel comfortable. So if you're targeting women, how are you going to make them feel comfortable, even if it's in a co-ed situation? By having other women there, not just participants, but instructors. And then to take it from instruction, that safe, comfortable, respectful, inclusive situation, into pointing them to organizations like Wilderness, like Pheasants Forever and Women on the Wing, point them to situations of support where they can grow mentorships. So as a federation, we can't do that, but we have excellent partners that we can point people to create that mentorship, that long-term support system. And that's why we're all working together. It's not a competition. You see all the women on this panel right now. We're not competing with each other. We're lifting each other up. We're growing our numbers in a way that they're not going to fall off. We're not going to have this churn rate that we have. So that's just, those are some of the things that I've pulled from my experience with talking with women. Yes, we have the data. It supports every single story that I've heard. And women need permission to take this time for themselves. We have to give ourselves permission, but we also need to hear it. It's not selfish for you to do this. It's not, it's something that you need to do, that you need to find identity in something that you're passionate about, but they need to figure out their why of why they're doing it. And then they won't get out of it. They will stick with it because they have a support system, they have their why, and they're being educated in a safe, respectful, inclusive space. So I'm hoping that the Federation continues to do that and working with our agencies. I know that Wilderness does that. They are amazing women that work really hard at teaching hunting, fishing, shooting sports, hiking, foraging. Like it's for everybody. But like Mark said earlier, that getting into hunting and fishing kind of feeds into these other sporting types like shooting and archery. So yeah, I think that's it. I think I've wrapped. I might have been under the 10 minutes. I forgot to turn my timer on, but it is that emotional tie to all of it. If we can just remember that without emotion, women won't keep going with it. Without figuring out what that why is, they won't continue with it. It's not worth their time. And so to make time, you have to find that out. Thank you, Taniya. I appreciate all of you guys, all you ladies on here. I love it. I'm honored to be a part of this.
And your passion shines right out of your pores. We're glad to have you. And thank you so much for speaking to your personal perspective and your experiences. If there are any links you'd like me to share for you in the chat, I'm happy to, if you drop those to me. Thank you so much. With that, next up we have Mandy Harling, our Director of Education and Outreach Programs with NWTF. Welcome, Mandy.
Hey, welcome, everybody. I'm impressed that we have so many people attending today and they've hung on, so I will be quick. I have been with the Federation for 19 years, and all of that time I've worked with our outreach and education programs, and I have really seen them change over that time. As Marissa mentioned, it's very important to me as a woman to see women leading conservation organizations and to be able to learn from other women in this industry. So we actually started Women in the Outdoors in 1998. And before that, though, I was just recently going through some history and saw that in 1978, we started hen tracks in our newsletter. So we had a female outdoor writer who would contribute. And I think that's really neat that in 1978, we had an article just for women in each newsletter. And we also had our first female board member about that time. So pretty impressive. We've been working to recruit women in the outdoors for a long time. As I mentioned, we have had Women in the Outdoors since 98. Prior to that, we had a youth program. And then we've gone on to add others to that. We got involved with archery and probably around 2017, I think. And since then have been, changing our programs, modernizing our programs as more information like this becomes available. So I've seen those programs change over those years. We also partner with a lot of different local, regional, and national partners to host events. And the way the National Wild Turkey Federation works is our events, we are a national organization, and most of our events are hosted by local and state chapters of NWTF across the country. And that makes it unique. Each event is different because they're customized by that chapter. So some might be multi-day events. Others are learn to hunt clinics that you might be connected with the State Wildlife Agency or another group for the next step. It could be a workshop. It could be a fun weekend outdoors that leads up to a mentor hunt. So a lot of variety in the events that are hosted within WTF. And we've seen those events I mentioned a couple of times, but we've seen, they've become more hands-on over the years in that they're more, it's not just general outdoor skills. There's, more to that. What we've learned that women want, they want to learn field dressing and actually how to cook that meat. And so more to it than, just learning how to shoot. As far as how we find participants to attend events, so this is always something that, it can be a struggle. And I reached out to several of our rock star Women in Outdoors coordinators to find out what they have seen that really works for them. And they have said that creating an email list and posting on Facebook, those are all good, but they're one of the things that our New Jersey Women Outdoors coordinator, who I think is on this call, she mentioned that what's really worked for them is to create a community. So essentially a Facebook group that you can stay in touch and pull others into that community. It kind of gives the ladies a place where they can post comments and ask questions, see pictures from all of your events, learn about upcoming events. Might even be a different organization or a state agency event or some other type, but you can share information there. So that virtual community becomes, really a way for people to connect together after the event. It also helps, social media has been wonderful to be able to post pictures from the events and to stay engaged with your participants so that you can tell them about other events that are coming up. As far as how we scale our efforts, so we were asked if we have staff, and we do have NWTF staff, but not dedicated just to Women in the Outdoors or to our outreach programs. We do have some R3 coordinators that we partner with state agencies in various states. So those R3 coordinators, they are available to help and to, facilitate events and help plan those. But for the most part, our events are facilitated by volunteers, and we try to identify one volunteer in each state that kind of carries the flag for the state. We also host, we just had one last night. We have Zoom calls with our volunteers where we're able just to share ideas. And if someone, has something they're looking to do, they can bring it up and people can give advice and that kind of thing. That's been really helpful for us to engage with our coordinators throughout their facilitating events. And in my opinion, the best key to success is partnership. And several of you have mentioned that. But we partner with state and federal agencies, other local groups, the other NGOs. The National Wildlife Refuge system has been wonderful. And even industry, there's a lot. We, always want industry to get involved too. But locally, what's available to you is important too. So our coordinators say you've got to pull in partners to have a successful event. So if you're having, I think Christine mentioned, women want to know what exactly they're going to be doing that day, and they want details on it. So if you're going to have fly fishing, obviously, I'm not the person to teach you about fly fishing. So if you come to that event, you're going to want to hear from an expert. So we, would partner with Tribe Unlimited or someone else that can really teach those classes. As far as funding, our local chapters do have startup funds that are available, through the money that's raised for the organization. But it takes more than that. I mean, that's just a little bit of seed money to get started. So all of our events have local sponsors. We do a lot of grant writing within the organization, looking for funds for that. And we do special fundraisers, all kinds of things. But funding, there's always a way to find a way to pay for it. It's whether it's through those local sponsors or grants, there's money out there to host events, certainly. So as we look at retention, one of the questions we were asked is how do we keep people engaged and make sure they want to come back, and what about mentoring? So one of the things I wanted to mention is one of our coordinators said, one of the things they've learned is surveys are super, super important. So one of the biggest things you can do is survey people before the event. Find out before the event what they're looking to learn and what their expectations are. Like Mark said, expectations can be the death of us. But what do they already know and what do they need to learn at your event? And then afterwards, you'll get really valuable information about your event, maybe where you missed the mark, how to retain the attendees moving forward, how to connect them with other opportunities. Many of our events are multiple opportunity type things where we lead them to a next step, but we also want to make sure they leave that event knowing how to contact the state wildlife agency, how to find out what areas are open to hunting around them, some of those key pieces of information when they leave. And then other advice, I thought this one was good. One of the R3 coordinators said, spoil your attendees. These women are often the doers of many things. They have homes and families and jobs, and they're taking their time to come to your event. So you want to make them feel special when they're there and really pay attention to these details and make sure they know what to expect and then have that follow-up information. And the other thing I think I forgot to mention here was the mentoring. One of the things that we've done as an organization is try to offer some training for mentors. One of my coworkers showed up on a deer hunt. She'd never hunted deer before. And they just put her in a blind and said, we'll pick you up in a little bit. That was many years ago, but still, she just put her gun down and said, I'm just going to sit here and watch because I don't know what I'm doing. And then we've all had other mentors. I came into hunting later in life. And one of the things that I really appreciate is a good mentor who doesn't make me feel pressured or, there were times I was so nervous I could just not stand myself and couldn't hold my gun straight, but because I didn't want to disappoint people. But keep that in mind when you're mentoring. Be kind, make it fun. Don't put pressure on people. But we have a whole training series that we have created for mentors or coaches. I think that sums it up. I'd be happy to talk to anybody anytime about our events or, partnering with you to continue. That's my timer.
Well timed. Mandy, thank you so much for sharing your information with us, your willingness to partner, and your insights on setting expectations and evaluation and building community for the further support of women within our conservation community. And I just really appreciate you joining us today to talk about your programs. Again, if there are any links that you can share, please feel free to send them to me and I'll drop them in the chat for everyone. Next up, we have Julia Flugie with Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Here to talk to us a little bit about Bo and then the expansion into the She Goes Outdoors podcast and additional programmatic pieces. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Julia, for joining us.
That's probably a good way to lead into it tonight. Thank you, everyone. Very excited to share what our programs have been involved in, and kind of what I'm going to do rather than kind of point direct into the questions is I'm going to share the story of our programs. And I think then that will answer the questions. And then in the end, I'll just maybe highlight some other points if you have questions. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back into about 2019. Doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but yet it was. In 2019 at MAFWA and WAFA, we had a group meeting, R3 committee meeting that met together in Arizona. And during that group, that gathering, a bunch of us professional R3 women we're talking about what are their strengths? What are we having issues with our in-person programming? Basically kind of with WIDO or becoming an outdoor woman. We're all putting these programs together, but what are we kind of battling to be able to continue along that dial with that retention, move along the pathways? What do we need to do? We knew that we're not competing against each other. Rather, we need to continue to work with each other because we're all in it for that same goal. So later in 2019, Nebraska, we hosted the first annual huddle. We didn't want to call it a conference. We didn't want to call it a meeting because those were boring words. And we weren't really, we wanted to huddle. We wanted to work together and work as a team. So moving forward, those coordinators and volunteers from at least 6 different states that coordinate BOW, WIDO, Pheasants Forever, Marissa was just talking, the women on the wing, we came together and we grabbed our pens, we grabbed the papers, we had the poster boards up and the markers, and we brainstormed. How can we continue to recruit in our programs? How can we even do things such as logistically, like when we're on site? How can we work together and make things better? So we discussed everything from event logistics, need for women mentors, and like we've been talking about today is retention. So during that same time, I discovered podcasting myself. I was trying to find podcasts that went to me, that woman that's new into hunting, has a family, very busy in my profession. I just wasn't finding it. There was podcasts out there that were, they're geared towards that, at least was that high level knowledge. I just wasn't ready to hear that hour and a half, 2 hours of discussion that was just way over my head. I wanted something, literally just dumbed down to something that I get, I understand. And so because I wasn't able to find that at the time, wasn't in my search engine, I decided to battle that, take that on myself. So over a glass of wine, myself and Michaela Ray at the time, she was with NWTF, our Nebraska R3 coordinator, we founded the podcast of She Goes Outdoors. And so there we just started interviewing literally ourselves. One of our beginning topics was going hunting with a baby bump, simple little conversations that then led into wanting to expand our outreach, because we were finding out that, we were talking, but we were talking to ourselves. We were just talking to a little group. We wanted to expand that regional efforts. So there we were. We were great friends and partners in our regional efforts. And it went back to this huddle with Tana Wagner from Kansas was there, Megan Weiskup and Rachel Alice was there from Iowa. So we invited them to start co-hosting, because again, we want this regional effort, this national effort, and they had the voices that also were adult onset hunters. Their voices could join us. And not only now are we, now that they have joined us, we are expanding the listenership across the nation, and as well as they are able to bring experts to the field to join us in that conversation. So we just started rolling with this podcast called She Goes Outdoors, and then COVID happened. We were planning on huddling again in Iowa. We wanted to meet in Kansas and record all these podcast episodes in advance, and COVID happened. So now what? We had been talking about how we are going to make our in-person programs better, but we know we weren't able to do the in-person. So, the podcast was able to continue. No problem, because we were already recording virtually. That wasn't an issue at all. However, we were not able to do the in-person programs. But, as we continued to talk, we didn't want to lose that momentum. We had some really great women programs happening in our Midwestern states here, and we didn't want to lose that. So after another glass of wine over virtually, right? Zoom virtual wine. Again, we noticed on our Facebook pages that we were being almost bombarded by all these take home delivered to us subscription boxes. My youth were getting targeted with, even with 4-H was sending these skill kits home and to learn from. So we're like, well, can't women do that, right? They want to learn, they want this skill. Why not try this? So that conversation then involved with this brainstorming session between us, and we came up with what we called the She Goes Outdoors subscription boxes. So from there, we started 1 year. It was quarterly. We sent these subscription boxes straight to these doorsteps, but a little bit different than your normal subscription boxes. We have talked today, we know that the women want, they want the hands-on, so that, right, their box is getting the hands-on, but they needed to be walk through. We wanted to walk through them. They wanted the collaboration. They wanted support, and they wanted that level of education that they felt that they were at. And so we brought that in by doing just webinars. So anyone that bought the subscription box, we invited them to an evening webinar where they met a She Goes Outdoors team. And then we brought in professionals. So whoever sponsored those or were partners in those boxes also joined us on that webinar. So Pheasants Forever joined us. Women on the Wing was our first partners, NDBTF. And then we had organizations or businesses with our binoculars, our fishing gear, you name it. It was great that we had all these partners, because again, we would not be able to do that. And that's one of the questions, is how are you able to fund that? Because it was across the state borders, because we were selling boxes. Now that we were not making money off these boxes, it definitely was because of our sponsors and the partners that were able to provide us this great equipment at low cost. And then we tapped into our foundations for support as well. And then just honestly, a lot of staff hours to put this into it. But it was worth it, because we continue to reach these people. They loved it. They came back monthly. We brought new people back once that word of mouth literally was there. Some Facebook target marketing brought them in. So where are we now? We're year 3 into our podcasting. We're very excited to continue reaching. We're doing some repeat terminology, but that's okay, because we're growing on that the the conversations. We're bringing in new experts, or not even necessarily experts. Like, we like to target on to staffing and invite people to our fields. Like, how did they become into that field? And for example, we've done some discussion on like depredation here in Nebraska. We brought in a female biologist to talk about that. And then I've had staff that I work with here in Nebraska Game and Parks that have reached out to me and said, I didn't know that. Like, I did not know that position. I did not know that information. I did not know like all about that topic here in our own state. So that's kind of cool. Not only are we reaching women outside of our agencies, but we're also reaching women that we work with every day. For an example, as a retention piece of it, we still do the podcast because we have now back in the field doing in-person legwork. We haven't been able to focus on those boxes, but what we've kind of find out through some data and some research that the women, they're ready. They want to be back in the field. And when I've done some evaluation, I think Tana and Rachel can say the same at their events, that when we do, even if it's a like raise your hand, when they're at our events, how have you learned about our BOW programs, our WIDO programs? It's because they did the She Goes Outdoors boxes during the pandemic, or they've heard about it in our podcast, which is really excited because we didn't lose those women. In fact, we also gained women during that point in time, which we're excited to see. One example is I have Karen Moore. She is an African-American lady that found out about the podcast on Facebook. She listened to the podcast. From that podcast, she bought a She Goes Outdoors subscription box. Then she is now attending our Become an Outdoor Woman mentored hunts. So we're really excited that she's kind of that example that she's following the pathway. She did a small game hunt. Then she did a pheasant hunt that we did with Pheasants Forever. And now, just last week, she did a deer hunt. So it's exciting to see those examples move along the dial and the retention. She's coming into the indoor shooting range every week too. So it's those examples that we love to follow, that we are doing some survey work with every time we do in person as well. And it's just, I'm hopefully I answered those questions through our stories, and I will, we can pass along my information in our podcast as well. I know Tana and Rachel can also answer those questions, but we thank for the opportunity to talk about our programs.
You got it. And I've been a guest on the podcast. I've gotten to see some of the goods in the box. I think it's been really cool seeing the pathways that you've created throughout the recruitment and then retention of female hunters in each of your states through this effort. So thank you so much for sharing what you've learned. And we're just glad to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Last but not least on our panelists, we have Desiree Holmberg, and she's working in Minnesota. She's a college student and works very closely with the collegiate Becoming an Outdoors Woman program there. So with that, Desiree, thank you so much for joining us, and please jump in and share with us some of the things that you've learned.
Hi, I'm Desiree Holmberg, and I have actually been a volunteer for the Minnesota Becoming an Outdoors Woman program for 15 years. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program first, how it works, and all the people involved, and then I'll kind of share my story, because I really feel like I'm almost a data point in this research as I was listening to Mark talk. And so first of all, our program at Minnesota is run through our DNR, and we have one part-time bow coordinator that coordinates all of the volunteers, including myself. We have a steering committee that plans, implements all of our programs throughout the year, and we are the largest bow program going on. So the biggest part of our program is all of these volunteers, because we only have the one woman that works part-time. And we have, with our steering committee, we've really, and some of our steering committee members are actually parts of these other programs that we've talked about today, like Pheasants Forever. I think we have 2 or 3 women that are from a local women's Pheasants Forever chapter. And so we all work together to plan these winter workshops, and we have actually 3 weekend workshops, one in the winter, one in the fall, and this year we're trying the spring program. And then we also offer Beyond Bow classes, and then we do Beyond Bow mentor programs where we actually have mentors that take women out hunting in the field. And then the other big key point of our program is the volunteer Facebook page, which is really where you've heard from other people, where the community really gets involved. And that gives women the opportunity to, if they've met someone at one of our events, they can go on there and connect or ask questions that they come across through their journey of exploring these outdoor activities. And that's made a big difference. Community seems to be one of the biggest things. We can teach women skills, they can walk out the door, and then they might never use them just because they don't have anybody else to do it with. My experience, I'm a product of the bow program. I got involved when I was in college. I was 20 years old. I saw a flyer on my college hallway, and I looked up and I was like, I'm going to do this, because I had been hunting with my brother in high school. He went and started his own life, didn't have time to come back and hunt with me every year. And so I went to this workshop. I learned all kinds of different things. And then I thought, well, I don't really want to take a spot in these workshops. So I was invited to go on the steering committee. And then in that time frame, I was surrounded by all these women who helped encourage me, teach me skills, and then encourage me to teach other women those skills. And I'm not sure that without that kind of push and that community that I would have been able to do it. Because I just needed someone to look at me and say, you know enough, you can do this. And I have done a lot of different activities since then. I'm a big bow hunter, archer. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I work at an archery shop now. So I think what we're doing that is working is really providing those people in all these different collaborations with environmental learning centers, nature centers, all of these other organizations, and bringing them in. And that helps scale, because really with the volunteers and the one person that works for the DNR, it's hard to grow a program like that. And if you can get these other organizations to come in, and oftentimes they have the equipment, they have the mentors, and anything else you need, and that really helps build that community out. Then they're making friends, and that's a big part of our workshop. Is like, we do the classes, but we also have time to sit and have conversations, and sharing those stories and sharing those real. I like to bring a lot of humor into my classes and when I mentor people, because I think people need to hear real stories about real things that happen while you're hunting. Like when you have buck fever and you try to shoot that arrow and you're shaking so bad that you miss the deer completely. Like, these are real stories that women need to hear, so that they're not so pressured to get out there and get that big buck that first time. And they understand that it's a process, and that all of us, including men, have all been there and had to learn these things along that path. So, sorry, I get really passionate when I tell that story, but I would say the biggest way that we find participants seems to be word of mouth. We just did a survey at our last workshop, and they said word of mouth, and then we have an email list. Those are our 2 biggest ways that we find participants, but we're usually like booked up and have a waiting list for most of our events. So we haven't had too much trouble with that. And then for retention, retention is a little bit harder, like we've all kind of talked about. It's really, I really think the more we build out the community, the more we share our stories, the more there's an easy opportunity for women to say, hey, I'm going hunting this weekend, or I'm going to go shoot archery, or I'm going to go shoot at the range. And we give them these opportunities to go, the more they will. And I think that that's what the Facebook communities and events type of things is great for, because women can say, I don't know, I think I'm going to go shoot archery this weekend. Does anybody want to meet me at the range? And I live in this area. That's been the best for us.
Thank you so much for helping to tie all of those pieces together. And I really love how you hit home on this idea of incremental mentorship. You don't have to be a 15-year avid hunter to mentor someone else if you know this much. And I think I heard somebody on the panel say this. If you know this much, that's as much as you can teach that much to someone else, right? And
Yes.
and we often can, or I know I can, undervalue what experience I do have. But that kind of incremental information is much more accessible than someone that hasn't been a novice for a long time. And so that's something special that folks that are new in these activities can offer. But also each of us, have unique skills and abilities that we can bring. So to all the practitioners at home, we're going to enter into some Q&A here with these specific practitioners about things that they have found. And then we will be wrapping up after that. So here is your opportunity to drop some questions in the Q&A, and just again, to extend a thank you to everyone that has participated on the call today. So with that, some of the questions that came up, each of us are from different parts of the country. And so a question came in about, as people are talking about mentoring and mentored experiences, has anyone come in conflict with state guiding laws? For example, Montana has an outfitter and guide board that defines a guide as a person who accompanies a participant in pursuit of fish and game. So have any of you had experiences restricting mentorship in your states?
I think we've had an issue in Alaska where we've tried to do a beyond bow, and I can't remember exactly what were the subjects, but I think because our instructor wasn't an Alaskan and not a registered guide in Alaska, we were blocked from doing that. Could not go do programming in Alaska. So there's one example.
Okay, thank you. Any other just awareness pieces around conflict that you've seen on the ground with state regulations?
I guess my question would be too, is it, I'm assuming it's specific to public land. And, sometimes I think if that's a struggle, if there's ways to work with, landowners, or a situation where you can mentor in a different place, if that's a barrier, there's certainly, capabilities there. I haven't experienced that personally, but I know that there's a lot of different nuances to some of those things. And so even just, reaching out to your local state agency to try and understand it a little bit more, explain what you're doing. And there may be a way to find a solution there.
Yeah, thank you. I am much more aware of scenarios in states where they have offered mentored hunting and apprentice hunting license opportunities to provide protected experiences and easier access without having to go through a draw system for novice hunters, whether they're adult or youth. And I know that the accompaniment laws and those particular licensing opportunities are special and specific for novices to remove some of those, at least initial barriers. So I hope that there are certainly some states that are considering what those opportunities can look like.
I would also say check with groups that are already in your state. So in Montana, I know Artemis has a presence in Montana. How are they doing it? Because they can give you insight into those steps that will streamline your, whether it's an application process or whatever it is. If you can find those organizations that are already doing it, and you might have to search for them, or maybe when we get a list of what states, organizations we have with this, you can look them up and they can give you that insight, because that's invaluable. And state agencies are great. Like we work heavily with our state agency and they have the rules and laws, but it's nice to have a group that has gone ahead of you that can tell you what not to do and what to do to streamline that process.
Excellent. And along those lines, for anybody that's watching who's not aware of who Artemis is, they are a female-specific National Wildlife Federation program, and they focus on mentorship. They've worked across the country, and I will drop a website link for them in the chat. Any other thoughts or questions about that? Amy, thank you for adding that piece to the conversation. I think you're spot on with that. The next question I have for the crowd, for Bose, how do you handle the balance of allowing repeat participants if they are possibly taking spaces from new participants? And I know programmatically this is something that has come up in conversation between states often. And the follow-up to that question was perhaps they're continuing to participate to learn new skills, and then maybe there's a cutoff at a point, or perhaps there's an opportunity to recruit as mentors. What are your thoughts about that, and how have you in your specific scenarios worked with that particular topic? So Julia, I imagine this relates to some of your experience. Desiree in Minnesota, I imagine this is relating to you. And of course, Dr. Thomas, this is well within your wheelhouse.
Yeah, it was becoming a problem. And sometimes it is still a problem with our Become an Outdoor Woman program. But the way we've tried to open the doors to new participants, especially our Maine weekend, is we have required, when we open it, it's getting ready to open here in end of February. The Become an Outdoor Woman Maine weekend is for them to sign up between, let's say, February 20th until April 1st. They have to be a new participant. And we leave it open for quite a ways that time, because we want that time frame for us to allow to market, for the word to spread that it's open for those new participants to sign up. If a past participant wants to come and wants to sign up, they have to register. They have to bring someone new with them. So that's helped because it's introduced those new people. They've come with somebody that is already comfortable with the program. We've went from, I want to say, this is just throwing some averages out, 25% new participants coming to when we initiated this program to now about 60 to 70% new participants. So it's really helped out. Then we find those new participants, they will try to bring someone back the next year. And then they're also attending our Become an Outdoor Woman programs, and then looking into our mentored hunts. So that has helped us as well.
Awesome. Desiree, did you want to touch on that? I definitely want to give Dr. Thomas an opportunity to round out the discussion.
Yeah, I think we've also done that. We've had, they'd have to bring a new person, or sometimes if we see them all the time and we know they have the skills, then maybe we encourage them to join the board, or, and start teaching if they've come that many times. So that's how we've handled that. One of those two ways.
Yep, we've asked them to start mentoring or teaching.
Awesome. That graduation through the process is huge. And, who doesn't want to go hang out for cheap with a bunch of your buddies for a 3-day weekend, right? Doing some of your favorite things. Of course, it sounds like an amazing and intriguing opportunity. And who doesn't want to do that over and over again? It's up to us to make sure that we are using these tools appropriately for the purpose they've been designed for. And I love hearing some of the strategies you've put into place to do that. Thank you both for sharing. Dr. Thomas, would love to hear your thoughts about this.
Well, in Wisconsin, it's been a lot less of a problem than it was at the beginning. At the beginning, I actually had a guy try to bribe me to get his wife in ahead of everybody else because she had trouble getting in. Obviously, I didn't do that, but I would say this about that. If I love Julia's idea there, I think that would work. But I think if a woman is coming back over and over and over again to your workshop, it's because she found the community that we have all been talking about, and she doesn't want to give up her community. And so I think what that tells us is that in our R3 programming, we need to figure out how to move communities of women to the next place. So they go with their community to the next from the bow big weekend to maybe a bow focused activity weekend that shows that they're gaining more skills and getting on to the higher level sorts of activities. I think that's pointing out a need that needs to be met. That's what I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much for adding that perspective to it. I think you're talking about how we meet the needs of our public, and being responsive to that is a huge piece of our role here. There was a specific question for Julia. Could you share more about Beyond Bow as an option and kind of what that is and what it looks like?
Absolutely. So Become an Outdoor Woman program, kind of like what Dr. Christine Thomas was talking about, is that next step. So our Beyonds are that next step. So whether they have participated in the full weekend, and in our full weekend BOWs, they get just a taste of an activity. They spend 2 hours on a particular topic, but then they would leave. Like, what do we do next? So our Beyond will focus on like a particular topic for a full weekend. We have a very successful series program here in Nebraska where we'll spend a whole month, one night a week for a whole month on a particular topic, such as archery. Then the next month will be shotgun. The next month will be shotgunning, will be handguns. Or Beyond is even just a mentored hunt. So they kind of see it as that Becoming Outdoor Woman, that collaboration, that program. They see it as a program that I trust because I've done this. Now I can trust them to teach me this. We've even found that where women will find us on that at a Beyond, they'll come to a Beyond, they'll learn about the program, and then they'll go to the full main event. So I think it's because that's centered on a particular topic. Maybe it's in different parts of the state. Maybe it's because it's a timing of it. They may not, we know as women that we cannot just up and leave sometimes for a full weekend, or Beyond will only focus on a topic for a couple hours. And so it's just a variety of opportunities that have been really helpful on that pathway.
Can I weigh in there? In Wisconsin, a Beyond Bow generally is a day or a weekend focused on one topic that perhaps was introduced at a bigger weekend where they only spend a couple of hours. And an example, this November, we did a Beyond Bow deer hunt, mentored deer hunt at our Tree Haven field station. And the women paid over $300 a piece to go to this. 8 of them went. They were all mentored. They had all their meals. They stayed at the field station. They had their meals together. They gathered around their fireplace the night before and the 2 nights during. So it was like going to deer camp. And Peggy Farrell, our coordinator, called all of them ahead to ask them what were their expectations, how did they want this to go? Why were they doing it? Why would they pay over $300 to go do something that they could do free many places in the state through the department where, a mentored deer hunt would cost nothing? Okay. They went because they knew because of the brand. They went because they knew they were going to be safe. They knew that what the facilities were going to be like. They knew what the food was going to be like. And they knew that they wouldn't have to worry about their mentor. So that's, I think, a little take-home message on making sure everybody that you're in your R3 programming, whether it's a state agency or whoever it is, that you're developing a brand and that the women know what they can expect and they know they're going to be taken care of and they know they're going to be safe. I think that's one of the take-home messages that resonates with the research that Responsive Management just did.
Thank you so much for that. Some of the just chat that's going on kind of between between multiple questions that are coming in are about Artemis. For one, I just wanted to welcome Kayla West. She's on the leadership team with Artemis, and she's been kind of sharing some of their links. There's quite a bit of information on their website as well. In addition to that, there's several folks that are sharing some of the challenges that they face in their states, and I would encourage each of you to take a look at some of those questions, and if there is an opportunity to provide some guidance on ways you may have navigated similar situations, I'd love to offer that opportunity to you. And I'd like to talk just a little bit more about retention of female instructors and some of the cultural things that we see as we bring in new instructors and do that recruitment strategy to reach specific audiences and provide representation in a meaningful way, and how we kind of balance also honoring our existing instructor base throughout that may have a very different culture in place or may have a very different approach to doing this work. So with that, the question specifically is a person explaining that they noticed a large issue with retaining female instructors due to large life changes, but also having issues with retaining female instructors who may not feel comfortable or may be intimidated by other instructors in the existing instructor pool. So do you have any suggestions on how to retain our female instructor base that you've experienced in your lines of work? Desiree, please.
So being an instructor myself, I know I've been through this. When I started, I was a college student, then I got married, then I had children, and I have gone through all this. And I think the best way to do that is really to allow your instructors. Our instructors can get burned out very quickly because especially we are finding in Minnesota, like we all tend to like to volunteer for all the things, and we have our volunteers, our instructors are often doing Pheasant Forever stuff, and maybe they land on the same weekend or whatnot. So allowing them that space to do it on their own terms, but also maybe marrying some, like during our bow workshop weekends, we have assistants, and even though they're not teaching, they're still in there, they're learning what works, what doesn't work. And that's the best way to kind of funnel them. And then you also have these backup instructors if somebody's sick or they're, something major happens, or they, get pregnant and they have a little baby at home. Like we've kind of set that up in a great way to funnel people in when we can't, but it's definitely hard. And it's something that I think all of our groups have probably seen. But I think, and then also just reaching out in that time frame, because sometimes when you have a kid and it's been a year, you're like, oh, well, I haven't hung out with them a year. I don't know what's going on within the organization, and allowing those emails and just saying, even if you haven't volunteered in 2 years, if you have space, make sure to reach out to us when you can. I think that would help a lot.
I love that follow-up. I think that's a really key piece there. And Desiree, just for the record, sorry, I called you a college student when I first introduced you. I totally screwed that up. I started as a college student, have now progressed into a more official role with them, but thank you.
I would like to point out, we have many wonderful male instructors in probably all of these programs across the country. I think the key there is getting the right instructor, no matter whether it's male or female, someone who's enthusiastic, somebody who's passionate, somebody who's not competitive, somebody who's not judgmental, somebody who's competent, somebody who won't discuss politics in their class or in the social activities, because politics is intimidating and that creates a threatening atmosphere. And so I think it's more about the personality and the teaching approach of the person as opposed to their gender. We've got lots and lots of male instructors that the women think are wonderful. So I just wanted to point out there that we're not anti-male instructor in probably, I can't speak to the other programs, but I can't imagine that you don't actually include everybody in your teaching if you have good ones.
Yeah, I'm 100% glad you reiterated that point, that this is about our entire comprehensive conservation community and how we can help support people that need additional support, and how it can be an inclusive environment for all people. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that key message.
I think that another thing to point out when you're talking about leadership or instructors, if you are starting out as a group who has catered mainly to men in the past, how do you infiltrate that? How do you keep a female instructor or introduce female instructors to a situation like that? You can't just get one. So there's a sense of comfort in that there should, if you can have more than one in that situation, even if you have only one female participant coming in, having at least two instructors with the other men just allows for that. You're establishing hey, we know that this is important. We value you, and this is how we're going to set this up. And I think that groups that are starting out like that, I think it's a great initiative to show that you're paying attention to the needs of female instructors, not just participants.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a question in the chat that actually, or in the Q&A that points to something very interesting on this front as well, that sometimes it's not just women coming into a male environment. It can be different ethnic engagements. You might have a person of color is entering into a predominantly white mentoring environment, and how do you make sure that you are creating inclusive spaces for all people, regardless of who you are and regardless of who they are? What are you doing to make sure that you are being inclusive in your spaces? There's a specific comment about a woman that's hesitant to engage in a local women's hunting organization because it feels like a clique, and she's a person of color, and it definitely feels like an outsider in that particular space. And I can sympathize with that, and that's what we're here to talk about, right? There are ways that we can work towards creating a more diverse and inclusive outdoor space for all. So with that, there were some questions. I don't mean to shortcut this part of the conversation. There's an additional question though that I'd like to touch on, but are there any final thoughts on that piece before we move on?
I think out of the women that I've interviewed, the consensus that has come across with people of color coming in, your leadership might not have somebody that looks like them. It kind of goes back to that. If I walk in and I don't see somebody that looks like me, I don't feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But you can always have volunteers. You can always have instructors that are volunteering their time that can help out with that, especially if you know that person is coming. It's hard to gauge it when you don't know, but it's important to at least have somebody that looks like somebody when they walk in, because it automatically creates a sense of, oh, I can take a breath. And it opens up, instead of having to feel defensive or uncomfortable, they can automatically let go and breathe and not just enjoy the event or enjoy the instruction, but not have to worry about that and take in more information.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and can I just quick thought too, one of the things that I think is really important for any event that an organization or an entity hosts is just setting the ground rules for respect right off the bat. It doesn't matter who the participants and the mentors are. It's just everybody's an individual, and respecting and celebrating how we're all individuals, and having kind of a no tolerance for any kind of disrespect or exclusive type behavior. And so I think if that's an expectation that's laid out right from the beginning, then hopefully, the event will go well and everyone will respect each other and, enjoy why they're there.
100%. That was a great takeaway. There was a specific question about dogs. The dog training community is a very active parallel community to the hunting community. And there's just a question about how are you bridging those and how are we how are we reaching out in those specific communities to talk about the dog training folks? So I just would love to hear more about that. And Marissa, I see you eagerly nodding your head. I can't imagine
Jump into it.
Dogs have anything in common.
Big dog person myself. No, it's a great question. And obviously with upland hunting, we do a lot with dog training and dog work. NAVDA is an incredible partner with our organization and is very well known, the North America Versatile Hunting Dog Association. There's other organizations out there as well. There is a lot of interest that we've seen of women who get involved with hunting because they got the dog first. And then they wanted to, help the dog do what they were born to do. And so they learn how to hunt, or they're involved with NAVDA, but maybe they haven't taken that step to hunt. And so that's where we have an opportunity to work together. But dogs are like the perfect reason to get started in anything in my mind. So it's
kayaking, dog.
Yeah, it fits together perfectly. And I think that anytime that you can bring in lessons, a lot of the events that we host, even if NAVDA's not there, we're talking about the different types of breeds. We're talking about the difference between pointing dogs and flushing dogs and how to train them, how to decide what you like to walk behind. Some people want a dog to go on point and others, want the dog to do the work for them. And so giving people an opportunity to try those different things, to figure out what they like is really fun.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts about dogs and kind of bridging that gap between the hunting community and the dog community? So Christine, you're on
mute. Okay. It's a great recruitment opportunity. I mean, honestly, any workshop where we have dogs, women and dogs are a thing. Okay. So dog sledding, it always fills. Okay. Dog training. It's a thing. If you're having trouble filling your workshops, or if you want to recruit a new community to join your community, incorporate some dog things. It's a great idea.
Yeah, we have dog sledding, and then we've also done dogs at our workshops, and everybody loves it. It's the most favorite thing of all of them. So
God, I'm glad I'm not a cat person right now.
Yeah, we here in Tennessee, we've got duck hunting dogs, we've got rabbit beagles who are amazing. I mean, it's amazing to teach people how to hunt behind dogs. And I think that I don't know, I can go rabbit hunting with a beagle, and I could probably sit there and watch the beagle work the whole time and not even shoot a rabbit. So I love that was a question, because it is, like Christine said, it is a great way of getting people in and introducing them to a specific kind of event or hunting or some kind of recreational thing. But yeah, we like our duck hunting dogs down here.
There are some amazing questions coming into the chat. We're running short on time here. There's one specific theme that I think is well worth following up offline, which was about, there was an extension that was added about the guide service, that if you're taking money for mentored opportunities, that then you may have to have a guide license in some states. And then there was an additional follow-up question about how we price our experiences, also to reflect the value of instructors' time and the experience itself, and to increase retention of participants in those events. So that's worth a whole other webinar, in my personal opinion. There's definitely interest and passion there. But today, I want to round us out. I want to offer Marissa some opportunity to share some major takeaways and call to action for today, and just take a moment to thank you all for the incredible effort that you've put into not only making this webinar a success, but for providing this research and these data to the community that we serve. Thank you all. And Mark, there's all sorts of opportunity in the chat to expand this into Canada if it wasn't already there. So if you didn't see that, there's like urgent requests and offerings of data.
Are we going to be able to have that chat and questions? Because I know there's a lot of questions, but I want to listen to what everyone has to say and respond to those afterwards. So I will get those. And if you have a question for us, we'll respond. I just didn't want to do it while people were talking. So
100% respect that. And yes, we will be able to share the chat with everybody here on the call.
Thank you.
Awesome. So with that, Marissa, I'd love to hand it over to you. Take us home.
All right. Well, I really, really appreciate everyone being here today. It's been an incredibly fun experience, and really it's exciting to have this opportunity to discuss the future of women in R3 and how we can continue to work to build confidence and competence in our participants. If anything, hopefully everyone's remembering competence and confidence after today's session. So we hope that you'll take something from today and implement that back into your own programs. We've heard from messages from over 10,000 women. Every time I say that, it just blows my mind. 10,000 women who shared with us exactly what they want. They want to continue to participate in R3 programs. They wish there were more programs available to them or that they were aware of. And most importantly, they desire the confidence to strike out on their own. We've also had the opportunity to hear from several incredible individuals today, sharing the work that they're doing back home. So really, what's next? Well, let's continue to build off of what was shared today. So to participate in our 2023 project, remember to reach out directly to Mark Duda with the contact information that was shared in the chat. Most importantly, let's keep this conversation going and continue to work together, because really together is how we make the largest difference in the retention of women in hunting, archery, and shooting sports. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.